interested community members to access and watch. In-person public participation will be taking place tonight in accordance with social distancing and safety protocols established by the Chelmsford School Committee Public Participation Guidelines. Anyone interested in speaking during the public input portion of the meeting would notify the superintendent's office by yesterday afternoon, been provided with these guidelines and assign a time to attend the meeting to speak. If anyone watching this meeting live has questions or comments to share, are encouraged to email one of us during the meeting. We'll read their questions or comments during our second public input session at the end of the meeting. So welcome to this meeting of the Chelmsford School Committee. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes from our meetings on December 7th and December 21st.
I move that the school committee approve the minutes from December 7th and December 21st.
Second.
Okay, any corrections, comments? Okay, all in favor? Aye. And thank you for making those updates to the meeting minutes. All right, next up are our student representatives.
All right. Hi, everyone. So on January 27th, there's the 8th grade parent information night where parents will hear from the administration about CHS and then have the option to hear from curriculum coordinators about the different pathways that the high school offers. And they're also going to have a chance to take a tour of the school. Also, we are coming close to the end of the second term, and final exams for semester-long classes will be happening soon, January 18th through the 21st, and we will not be having any midterms for full-year classes. Also, the therapy dogs are coming back to CHS, and this will be on Thursday, January 6th in the Career Center. This was set up by the Mindfulness Matters Club. And lastly, on Thursday is the Reverse College Day, which is going to be a panel from current college students who will talk to the high schoolers about their college experience and allow a chance for questions.
So the Theater Guild's currently hard at work, and so on January 28th in the Black Box Theater, they're putting up Tribute to Mamma Mia in Greece, which is a cabaret-style show. And additionally, they're working on their festival competition play, which will go up in March. They're putting on a production of Faith and Despondency, and this is the story about the Bronte sisters, who were influential authors. They always put on really great productions, so I'm very excited to see both of those. It's the beginning of senior scholarship season, so the deadline for the high school alumni scholarships is approaching on January 17th, with the deadline for the Town of Chelmsford Scholarship on February 11th. And seniors have been getting weekly newsletters from the guidance counselors on how to navigate this process. All CHS students took the Youth Risk Behavior Survey today during Pride Block, and the information collected by it will be used to update health education programs and social emotional curriculum and programming. And then finally, next Friday the 14th at 7 p.m. is Lime's In Tune concert. So many student musicians will be performing. Proceeds will go to support their 24-hour relay in the spring, as well as to the Clean River Foundation. And they always do such a wonderful job pulling this event together.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for the student reps? All right, well, thank you very much. Any good news?
Good news, it's 2022 and Happy New Year, and we're happy to see everybody back in our buildings. And that's our good news right now.
All right, anybody else have any good news they want to share? I just wanted to congratulate Thomas Brown, who's a freshman at CHS, who actually won the Lowell Holiday Tournament this past week. He's the first freshman heavyweight to win the tournament in the history. I don't know, it's been probably 50 years. So congratulations to Thomas, and also Jack Walsh, who placed fourth, and the team placed 15th out of 73 teams. So it was a good week for the wrestling team. So congratulations to all of them.
That's great.
All right. We're now at our first public input portion of our meeting, but I don't believe we have any speakers registered.
We don't.
Okay, so we'll move on to new business. We good for the first presenter, or?
I think we are.
Okay.
Give me 1 second, and we'll try to get him on the line. John, can you hear me?
We do.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, John. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
Great.
You had a good holiday break.
We did. Thank you very much. So you're only seeing me, but we are live at our school committee meeting. So around the table, just for perspective for you, we have some school committee members. We have our student reps from the high school, and Joanna Johnson-Collins, our business administrator, is here as well. And our first item on the agenda tonight, I had shared screen sharing rights with you. was to do a little bit of a talk with the school committee and then the community who might be watching this meeting around the strategic planning process that we're going to be undertaking really over the course of the next weeks through the winter and the spring. So John, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to introduce yourself and share your thoughts about the process and how we're going to tackle this with Chelmsford.
Yes, I would. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could give me the sharing rights to the John Kim slides, that would be helpful because I use two computers, just one for the slides and one for my camera.
Yep, hold on one second.
No, it's going down, make a presenter.
This one here.
Make a presenter.
I'm going to make you a presenter and an organizer just so you have everything.
Okay, great.
Do you have the rights that you need?
I should. I just, I think I was supposed to get it. It's asking me to restart. That's not good. Let me just see. It's asking me to restart that. Let me see what I can do here. For some reason, I have sharing rights on my one computer, but not the other.
So,
Yeah, I've given you access on both here. And I gave you sharing and organizer rights.
I think that's people at home.
yeah.
It's asking me to restart my computer. So why don't I just go, I'll rejoin in. And let's see if I can get in now.
He goes out and comes back in and just jump to another agenda item.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
It's okay.
I'm just gonna get off and rejoin. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay.
John, that actually did something to me because now I'm frozen. I can hear you fine,
You just can't stay.
but I can't see you.
I'm so sorry about that. I can see you fine. I'm so sorry about that, Jay.
No, that's okay.
This is how, this is how we roll. This is how we roll. That's okay.
I'm so sorry about that.
This is how it goes on a daily basis.
Let me do something. What I can do is,
We have the slides here, can we share them?
Yeah, I do have the slide deck from you. If you wanted, I could certainly advance it.
if you want to
And you-
go on, and then I'll ask you to be our, how's that? We'll just go from there.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody.
Oh,
Before we
John,
waste any
John, you got to hold on for a second. I'm going to have to now just go out and get back in because I'm frozen. So give me 1 second and I'll come right back to you
Why don't you just minimize him and then pull up the slides?
because I'm frozen.
Oh, you can't, you don't even have a cursor, okay.
John, if I lose you, we're just going to have to go out and come right back in.
No problem.
You're gonna lose him. I was just gonna tell you, you're gonna lose him.
Please stop talking.
Okay.
No, Sarah hasn't been here for any of the tech stuff, huh? Yeah, they always, it works so well. It's good TV for people at home.
Is that working now?
Hang on, John, I'm still,
hear you.
give me a second. Okay, so I do have you, I have to lower the volume a little bit. I have the slide deck up on my,
I don't hear you.
I have the slide deck up on my computer.
No, I don't hear you, so I'll leave and come back. I'll just, Sorry about that.
Don't you miss Google Classroom?
Okay.
Hey, John, can you hear me now?
That's interesting.
All right, hopefully there's only,
Can you hear me now, John?
yes, I can hear you fine now.
Okay. So I'm just, it's only me and you on the screen. I'm going to reduce my screen here, and then I can advance the slides for you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry about that. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Apologies once again for the technical delay there, but I want to start off by wishing everybody a happy new year, and I hope everyone had a restful and productive holiday season. Just very delighted and excited to have this opportunity to talk about our strategic planning effort. So we prepared a slide deck that I've shared with all of you, hopefully. And what I'll do is I'll ask the superintendent to just help me move the slides along. So why don't we just start with slide 3. So I want to just give a quick background on our organization and then myself, and then we'll go into the strategic planning process itself.
Sounds good. So, John, you're not going to be able to see the slides, but I do have them up here for the viewers at home.
Okay, wonderful. And Jay, did you want to do anything just in terms of framing the conversation anyway?
Sure, maybe for the viewing audience, I know the school committee is aware because we had a couple of discussions around strategic planning process. And a few years before the pandemic really hit, as a district, we were going to take a look at what our goals should be, short-term, long-term goals for the next 3 to 5 years of work in the Chelmsford Public Schools. And we were right in the middle of the process, and it was March of 2020 when everything kind of shut down with the pandemic, so we stopped at that point. And we really spent the last 1.5 to 2 years just focused on trying to keep our schools up and functioning with COVID and all the different scenarios that presented to us. But it's really time to kind of come back and revisit and take another look at 2022 and beyond, going out for the next, say, 3 to 5 years. What we want the focus of our work to be, what we know is working really well in the district that we'd like to see to continue. What might be some new opportunities that we want to explore as a district, working with our parent community, our students, our staff, to make sure that we're really all kind of rowing in the right direction, in the same direction over the course of the next few years. So instead of going through the process on our own, we've decided to contract with a group, district management group, and John Kim is here tonight to talk with us about that. John, I'm not sure of your exact title, but is the president, the head of the organization. And John will talk a little bit about his group and how they're going to approach working with us over the next 6 months or so as we put this together. So, John, I'll turn it over to you with that, and you can give us your proper title.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a wonderful segue into the slide 3, which is really about our organization. We were founded in 2004. So next month we'll be celebrating our 18th anniversary. And all that time we've had a singular goal, which is our mission hasn't changed, which is to partner with school districts in the United States to really think about ways in which we can support the sustained performance improvement of school districts around the country. And the way we define performance improvement is the intersection, and this graph kind of shows it, which is the intersection of what's great for kids, student outcomes, what's operationally sustainable and effective. And what that really turns into is how do we help make sure that educators and staff can do their jobs well. And then third, do that in a cost-effective way. So our kind of logo signifies the intersection of those 3 things. If you just go to the next slide, one of the unique things about our organization is that we work with school districts around the country, regardless of size, location, or type. When we first started the organization back in 2004, we felt that too much of the focuses was on like, are you an urban district or are you a small district? Are you a suburban district? And really, if you really think about it, districts large and small around the country, really there's pockets that are urban in nature, and there's more alike and opportunities that we can learn from each other than there are different. So we serve districts as large as Los Angeles. It's one of our partners. We work with 30 different states, and we work around the country, and we've done quite a bit of work in Massachusetts. And so you'll see on this chart that we work with districts across the country. We bring all of that to bear when we talk about strategic planning. If you go to the next slide, just a quick overview. We have three parts to our organization. We have a learning part, which is really focused on research, convenings, conferences, professional development. We have something called solutions, which is really thinking about ways in which we can provide structured support for implementation. And then we have the consulting part, which is where we provide advice, bring all of that expertise and knowledge to bear from different parts of the country. If you go to the next slide, this is a little bit about me. I'm the founder and CEO of District Management Group. One thing is I wear two hats in addition to having the privilege of leading this organization. I'm also a professor over at Harvard Business School. I teach a class called Transforming Education Through Social Entrepreneurship. It's a second-year MBA class. And I'm also the co-chair of something called PELP, Public Education Leadership Project, which works with large school districts around the country, precisely around these ideas of combining management and educational best practices, combining those two perspectives to bring about that sustainable performance improvement. So I'm the co-chair from the business school side, and I have a colleague who is a co-chair from the ed school side. Okay, so why don't we get into strategic planning? And if you go to the next part. So I thought what we talk a little bit about is our approach to strategic planning. And if you think about it, virtually every school district in this country has a strategic plan or is contemplating one. So what's really different about the way we partner with districts and provide that support? Then talk a little bit about the process that we'll go through. So just go quickly to the next slide. One of the biggest things, we did this research a few years ago where we looked at strategic plans around the country, because most of them are posted on people's websites. And you find that virtually everybody has a mission and vision and the goals that they're thinking about. But oftentimes, the one distinctive factor that most districts do not have is a prioritization of what's really important. And that's for a really good reason. It's because so much of what school districts have to do is to meet the needs of a very diverse community, very diverse stakeholders. And so it's very difficult to come up with a plan where there's really a tight focus on what are our priorities and how will we get there. And so you'll find that districts' plans have operational goals and timelines and things of that nature, but very few districts have that prioritization. So if you go to the next slide, it's just a visual representation of what is the purpose of the strategic plan in a world where there's so many different opportunities and needs and challenges, limited time and funds. How do you go about setting that guiding North Star? How do you go about aligning various stakeholders? How do you go about making sure that you're making progress against those goals that are so important to you? And how do you have a strategy that drives choices around your precious resources, time, money, people? And how do you do that? And the strategic plan has to really do all of those things. So if you go to the next slide, it's on slide 10. This is our strategic planning framework. So it's a kind of a simplified and generalized overview of how we think about it. But at the very top, you have mission and vision, which is really about the long-term aspirations of the district. The next part, the blue, theory of action and priorities, that's where the bulk of our work with you is going to be about. And then beyond that is really implementation. So when you get to the initiatives and action steps. So let me just explain a little bit here, and then we're going to go into depth a little bit. The blue part, it's called the theory of action, it's what I think most districts have talked about it, or many of you may have heard about it in different contexts, even at the district, but it's the fundamental belief around what you believe will lead to long-term success in the districts. It is really the anchor, the core idea of how strategy is going to be practiced in the school district. What is the fundamental design principle? What is the fundamental approach that the district will take that'll help us figure out how to achieve those long-term aspirations? And from there, we can then prioritize. And when you talk to school districts, there's so many different initiatives and projects and so on. But if you really think about what are the handful, really meaning 5 or fewer, what are the really key priorities that over the next 3 to 5 years that we really should be focused on? The theory of action, the priorities, that's where we think that this is an effort of both the school committee and the district leadership and the planning part comes together. And then the next layer of work, the initiatives and the action steps, those are specific projects of how you're going to achieve the goal. So think of the strategic plan as what you are hoping to achieve, and the implementation is how are we going to do it? What are the things that are going to come up to do it? And of course, the plan has to have the theory of action as the anchor, the priorities, and then that can lead into the implementation plan. Okay, so if you go to the next page, I'll just spend a few minutes on the theory of action and then on the priorities, and then I'll go quickly to the process steps because I want to leave some time open if that's available, Superintendent, just so that people can ask questions and it can be a little bit more interactive. But once again, just to emphasize, the theory of action really identifies what's ultimately going to drive success in the district long term. This is where the strategy comes in the strategic plan. So it's a set of beliefs, policies, and practices, and it's connected as the fundamental anchor of how you will achieve success in the long run. And so, some districts, for example, have a real focus, like just to give you some examples, concrete examples, some districts will say, look, our theory of action is to make sure that we have the best educators, we support them, so from soup to nuts and how we identify educators, how we bring them on board, how we train them, how we support them. We're going to really focus on that. Another district may say, well, in addition, and this doesn't mean that you don't do one and not the other, but it's really the emphasis which is what's important. Another theory of action could be, we have a really diverse community. And what's really important is that we provide the support and the conditions for school leaders to make decisions that's best for that community. Oftentimes you'll see that theory of action in a very large, like an urban school district where each neighborhood is very different, rather than having everything being done from a very centralized fashion. Our theory of action is going to be about having school leaders make differentiated choices and decisions about how to best support that. There are other districts that say, well, actually, in our district, we're cohesive enough that what we really should do is think about how we make sure that there's really good alignment and consistency of educational practices and operational practices throughout our district. These are examples of how we can articulate a theory of action that will then become the core and the base of how the strategic plan is then formed around and what and priorities that you'll determine. The important part of all of this is that in a district that we come together, make sure that we articulate, codify, so that when the district is out there working away the multi-year plan, the district, there's a cohesiveness and a coherence to how all the systems and structures and resources and people work together in order to achieve that goal. If you go to the next slide, once we have the theory of action, then we can start thinking about what are those priorities? How will we then have priorities that support the theory of action and how we will achieve the ultimate goals? And once again, the important thing here is that in a world where, in a state where there's so many different things that people want to accomplish, it's really important that we get it down to a handful of priorities. And priorities can change. It may be because things you've accomplished something. It can be an external factor like what we're experiencing now with COVID-related disruptions. But priorities are really important because it provides the organization with a focus around what's really important. And it doesn't mean, for example, if there's a prioritization around early literacy, which a lot of districts do focus on because it's the foundation, for example, for all learning, it doesn't mean that you're not going to work on numeracy or science or history. It just means that once that's going to be our focus. For every incremental resource, we want to figure out how to, strengthen that even more. Why don't we skip all the way down to 17, which is the process. And I'm happy to go back to some of the other areas, but this may be what's maybe on people's minds. So how are we going to do this work? Kicking off this work today, January 4th. We kicked it off already before we got here, but in December. But we're going to be forming a strategic planning design steering committee. The steering committee is a group of people who can represent the various and diverse views of the district, but small enough so that we can work together and meet together without making it so large that it's hard to schedule. It's a real working committee. It's important that various parts of the district is well represented there. We're already kicking off the work to do the needs assessment. We find that districts have quite a lot of information and data that they've already collected over time. And so one of the things that we do is rather than, we start with the idea that let us figure out all the information that you already collect, whether they're surveys, there's obviously a lot of academic data, there's operational data. Let's put all that together. Let's supplement that also with stakeholder focus groups and interviews to make sure that we have both quantitative information and qualitative information. And then we also have this two-part community feedback approach, which I think is also very distinctive. We go out to the community at this point and get feedback from the community and various stakeholders. We do all of that analysis, so that happens in the first couple of months of this calendar year. And then in that middle part where it says develop strategic plan, we're working intensively with the steering committee to make sure that we're incorporating the existing mission and vision. We're codifying and developing that theory of action that I mentioned. We're developing the district priorities. We're identifying the measurable goals related to those priorities. So these are the goals that we're going to be setting that reflect the priorities of the district. And then we'll end with creating that draft of the strategic plan. And then we go back out to the community to make sure, did we hear the input correctly? Did we get everything? Does the plan accurately and completely comprehensively reflect the priorities and the areas of focus for that community? And we make sure that as a second part, we make sure that we get input at that point. And then the design part of that ends at this point. And then the district can move forward in that grayed out area, the implementation, development implementation roadmap, to take the plan and then set yearly targets and initiatives and projects and activities that will reflect the implementation of the plan. If you go to just the next slide, it goes a little bit deeper into the role of the steering committee vis-a-vis our team, but steering committee, the important part is to make sure that we get the diverse perspectives based on people's experience, and we get content expertise. You know your community better than anyone, you know your schools better than anyone. We also want steering committees help to make sure champion that effort of developing, implementing this long-term strategic plan, and also provide active and consistent feedback as we're developing. It's a two-way between the community and the district. And then finally, what you'll have at the end of the process is a document that will serve as your strategic plan that will be that you can share with the entire community. So I went through that pretty quickly. I'm happy to dive back into some of the different components, but why don't I pause here for a minute and see if there's some particular areas, Superintendent, if there's some areas that you would like for me to go deeper into, or if there's some questions.
Yeah, why don't we actually open it up for questions, if you don't mind? I think you did actually do a nice job of kind of covering the process that we're going to go through. And this is going to be about a 6-month process. This is going to take a little bit of time. I think a couple of the big takeaways for me, just when we actually looked at working with this group, was the way that they actually go through the process. There will be a lot of stakeholder input. We'll be getting that right out of the gate. Staff, parents, students will be able to get that. This group will go back and confirm that, what they're hearing is actually what's happening in the district. I think that was a key. And then even in the end, when we have draft documents, they'll get run by the public again. I had mentioned to John, a lot of our work, just because of COVID, actually is going to be remote, and a lot of his staff are around the country working with us. So we will have opportunities for participation both remotely and in person. So people will have a variety of opportunities to participate through this process. So I obviously have been working with John, Linda, collecting data that they've already started to analyze. But if committee members have any questions about, process or how we're going to go about this, certainly you can comment. The only thing I would say is John is only hearing through my computer right now. So if you ask a question, I might have to relay it to him. But if you have anything, I'd be happy to pass it on and hear what he has to say.
All right, any questions people have at this point? I guess my question would be, how do you solicit stakeholder input? Are there gonna be surveys? Are there gonna be meetings? I mean, what kind of tools are you using to get this input from other people?
I heard the question, Jay, so I'll just respond directly. Basically all of the above. We find that school districts in general collect a lot of information in just the regular course of the work that they do. And so rather than asking people for additional information that may already exist, the first thing we do is, and we've already started the process with Jen and Linda, is just to collect all that information that already exists today. And then in addition to that, we will be doing focus groups and interviews. For example, with school committee members, we like to do interviews because it allows us then to get qualitative information that gives more character and just helps us to really contextualize the information that we collect. Oftentimes, we haven't. Once in a while, we'll say, "Hey, let's do a quick survey," because it's really needed. But oftentimes, we don't need to do that because districts collect so much information just from a variety of reasons. But if there's a particular area that we uncover, which we think that we need to go more deeply into, then we do that.
Could you maybe, John, just talk a little bit about like the focus groups for the audience? Again, we've been kind of identifying like what some of the focus groups might be by content. But can you talk a little bit about how some of that maybe works in other districts you've worked in previously, just to give people an example?
Yeah, and once again, we'll co-create this with the district. But for example, teachers, for example, making sure that we get the teacher voice into it. Different levels, elementary, middle, and high school. We want to make sure that we do that. We pay special attention to, for example, special education and students who may not be on an IEP, but who may be struggling or need extra support. So we actually want to make sure that we get a 360 view. And one of the best ways to do that is by identifying a group of teachers or a group of individuals that are part of that topic, be it 3 to 4 people to come in, and then we'll interview them in a group setting. It's one of the areas that Zoom has allowed it for us to do that, but given the fact that Chelmsford is nearby and with restrictions allowing us, we can also do some of that in person. But we just try to collect as much information, contextual information, qualitative information, to supplement what is typically a pretty voluminous amount of quantitative information.
Okay. Anybody else? Are students included in this group of stakeholders you're going to be surveying, and I assume parents, but students as well?
And sometimes students, parents, but the group that I didn't mention explicitly, for example, there may be some, if you kind of think about the large groups of categories of stakeholders, you obviously have stakeholders who have children and families who are part of the direct community of the school district. But then you have taxpayers who live in the town who are not part of that. So we try to seek those people out. There's business owners or people who run foundations, Boys and Girls Club. There may be some influential and important stakeholders that really are part of the broader community, but they don't actually have students, children in the school community. So we want to make sure that we hear from them too. So we just really try to make sure that people who have a stake, as stakeholders mean, that we get their voices into as we design and develop a strategic plan.
Great. All right, anybody else? Okay, all right.
Great. Well, John, thank you very much for joining us tonight and kind of providing that overview. I know it's helpful for the audience, just even watching from home, to get a sense of what's going to transpire, because they will begin to get emails asking for participation on various groups, so it's good to just set the context. I appreciate you joining us tonight.
Yeah, apologies once again for the technical difficulties, but thanks very much for giving us a chance, and we're delighted to be working with all of you.
Great, we'll be in touch soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, next up, we're going to have Doran Whittier again, presenting on the facilities master plan. So we're just waiting to get our technology turned over here, and we'll get going on that. Hopefully, it keeps working.
Projecting still?
I don't know. I assume so, because he said he has to get the clicker, so. Yeah. No. It's just kind of, so we can, Thank you, Jay. Very high tech tonight.
A lot of stuff going on here tonight.
Go to meetings and Zooms and.
No, well, at least we're done that one. I don't like the live stuff. Okay, so let me start this up. If you recall, just to again set a little bit of context. So our friends from Doran Whittier are back here this evening. When we were at the December 19th school committee meeting, Michelle, and actually Michelle didn't come that evening, but Brad and Jason were here that evening, and we reviewed that slide deck that talked about the different options and kind of where we were with the planning process at that point in time. It was a lot of information to take in, so we didn't necessarily take any actions that evening, but we wanted to be able to kind of walk through it, let people have a couple of weeks to think about the data, think about the different options that were in front of them, and then as we try to move towards an actual direction for the plan, be able to take that into consideration for these next steps, because we've really got two things looming. One, we have the finalization of our facilities plan, which will come together over the course of the next probably 4 to 6 weeks or so. And then right on the heels of that, in April, will be when we actually submit our next statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And a lot of that is going to be predicated on the direction we end up going with in the plan. So I actually, when we talked today with Doran Whittier, to kind of help the committee along. There were some decisions and some direction guidance we really need at this point. And then there's a lot of different decisions and questions that are going to come up later in the process after we actually were to submit to MSBA. If we got invited into a feasibility study, a lot of the discussions around, say, grade level configuration or, optimal use of spaces is going to come at a later time. There are just some kind of overarching, bigger decisions that we have to kind of make with regard to, do we still pursue a high school project? Do we pursue a middle school project or an elementary school project? There are some of those bigger ones that we have to walk through. So just to help us in that discussion this evening, Brad and Jason and Michelle are here. They put together just a small slide deck, almost like a decision tree that they're going to walk us through to help set a little bit of context for some of the decisions we do need to make now or at the next meeting, and then what actually will happen when we apply to SBA and ultimately get invited into a feasibility study, what comes at a later date. So I'll turn it over to Jason and Michelle and Brad, and you should be able to advance.
Thank you, Jay. We appreciate being back in front of you again as we're getting closer to wrapping up this particular study. As Jay mentioned, our agenda this evening is relatively brief. We wanted to help you not only complete this study, but position yourselves well for implementing, at least the first step in the master plan. And so we thought it might be helpful to, couch the key decisions or, input that we think we need to put you on that path. And the first one is to sort of agree to some master plan goals to help guide the decision-making that could potentially happen over the next several years. So we'll start with that. And then we'll pause and ask you to reflect on the presentation we made last time. We know you've had some discussions already to see if we can answer any questions or to participate in that discussion. And then Jay mentioned a decision tree, so we've got a one-slide graphic of what decisions maybe could benefit from being made sooner and which ones can be asked and responded to later in the timeline as the master plan unfolds. And then follow that up with a second discussion about what you think the appropriate action might be to take right now. So in terms of the master plan goals, right, we've been talking about these sort of all along during the study, but we tried to distill that and concretize it for tonight's discussion. The first thing on the list is sort of that recognition that there's a lot of facility and enrollment needs across the district. And so in its totality, the objective of a master plan would be to modernize all of the buildings in the district's inventory to achieve the educational enrollment, and facility outcomes that have already been identified. More specifically, recognition that any master plan outcomes should attempt to alleviate the overcrowding that currently exists in more than one place in the district, but particularly at the elementary schools. Last time we talked about how many elementary schools should the district have, and although we haven't really attached a formal number to that, what we've heard along the way is that this size of around 500 feels like a good number for elementary schools here in Chelmsford. And what would the consequences of identifying that as a target or something to make decisions around mean in terms of the number of elementary schools across the district? We've heard loud and clear twice now, first in the original master plan study, and again in this update, that there's a desire to relocate pre-K to be part of something else, whether it's an elementary school or the high school or part of a middle school project, but more strongly with the elementary schools. And so any master plan decision-making should attempt to achieve that as a goal. And the last one are about implementation. As we're making decisions in the future to prioritize projects that not only benefit the greatest number of students across the district in one project, but also do that as quickly as possible. And then second, the financial side of that equation is to maximize the educational impact with whatever financial investments ultimately get made at each step along the way. So we share those as sort of couching what any decision-making might want to think about or consider as goals for the master plan. And then, like I said, we'll pause here and reflect on that list and what we shared last time to see if you have any questions or any discussion needs to be had around what we showed you so far.
Any questions?
We know, for example, that you did some internal informal polling around priorities. I didn't know if you wanted to share your thought process on that or have any questions about how that went.
Yeah, sure. We just kind of threw out some, different reasons why we would want to take on, any additional building projects or any new projects. And, I think, in terms of the top three reasons, one is the elementary school overcrowding. I think we all see that as a primary issue that we need to take care of. We want to make sure if we do anything that it's going to benefit as many students as possible across the town. And in that, if we are going to put something forward, that it's something that both MSBA would be willing to accept and the citizens of Chelmsford as well. I think those are probably our top 4 out of 10 different priorities we had on there. So we just kind of, wanted to see where everybody felt. And I think we were, reached fairly common ground in most of those. I mean, outside of those, there's a little variation, but I think those top 4 were pretty consistent.
Okay, that's great.
Some of those items that you had seem to be consistent with the master plan goals that we just outlined as well, right?
Yep.
That's good.
I think I was a little lower on the benefits all students in town in like one project. Because I think my thinking is that if we alleviate, even if, let's say, we decide to go with an elementary school, that not all students would necessarily go through that new building, but all students at the elementary level would benefit from smaller numbers. So I think that was kind of my thinking. It wasn't that, I didn't think that all students should benefit, but I think that ultimately they will, right? Because they're going to get a better start, there's going to be less numbers in the classrooms, they'll get more attention in the early years that will help them, throughout their educational career.
Yeah, and I'm sure we all
Right.
came at it at different angles, but again, looking at those top 3, 4 things, there was some pretty good consistency, when we look at it, so. Okay,
I
any
think
other-
whatever we do, that level will be touched by the person if they remain in the system no matter what. So it's gonna have an impact on everyone, no question. I agree. I think for the most part, we kind of have a consistency here on the priorities. So, I think for me, definitely, something that's gonna get accepted is important, because there's talk and then there's talk, and then I'd like to be alive when the thing happens. It would be so wonderful. It's definitely not gonna benefit my children anymore, but maybe my grandchildren at some point, so it's important. And I think the town, we're growing more and faster than the process does. And at some point, it's gonna catch up to us and be a problem for Chelmsford.
And I think just one, I'm so sorry.
Please.
That, for me, the 1 and 2 is the likelihood of being accepted by the MSBA, and then the project being supported by the citizens of Chelmsford, because without those, there's nothing else. Like, we're not going forward. So I think that when we're, taking a look at the projects, I think we have to really consider those 2 things, because otherwise, anything else on the list is just not going to happen.
Right. And I think that's kind of why we want to do this, is when we start looking at the different options, which ones are going to best fit with these priorities, I think is why we kind of want to take that picture, so.
Just one thing about the kind of the MSBA acceptance part. And I think part of revisiting the master plan, when you've done it 5 years, right, and it's kind of an ongoing process. But just to be clear for the viewers at home and everybody else, right, the kind of the realignment and what we're doing here, I think has been really a good process in terms of rethinking a little bit about what your priorities are within the district, and then looking into, with the lens of how MSBA reviews these things. And I think ultimately, we don't know exactly where the outcome is yet, but we have a sense. But this is also thinking about what our good friends down at 40 Broad Street in Boston would say. So this is one part of it to kind of get your house in order, if you will, right, in terms of coming up with what you think the best candidate is. But ultimately, there's 351 communities within the state. And those all kind of get evaluated based on need independently. So I think what we're doing here really is good, and I think it's going to be more reflective of having a preferred option that has a higher likelihood of success. But I also just want to make sure everybody understands, right, because I'm telling you what they would tell you, is that there's no real guarantee here, but I think you're positioning yourself in a much better fashion based on how MSBA evaluates things and how your needs are evolving, based on what you currently have in front of you.
Any other questions? No.
I seem to have lost control.
I'll advance for you.
Thank you. So we know that we had presented several options, entire master plan options where we've sequenced potential projects out over a long time horizon. And, to move the study to conclusion and to help you with your decision-making, I think we wanted to make it clear that you didn't need to commit to the entirety of a 40-year master plan, in the next couple of weeks. But instead, there may be some key decisions that you could make over the next couple of weeks to put you in a good position to start that master plan process. And then as whatever the first domino is wraps up, then you start making the next series of decisions around the long-term master plan. So we created this flow chart to help express that a little bit. And we'll start over on the left. And we think the first big question is, and this is, I think, what your priority discussion focused on, is what grade level should be the focus of the priority project, right? This first domino to fall. And we've talked about this before. There's essentially three choices: something at the high school level, something at the middle school level, or something at the elementary school level. And we've just recently been made aware, in fact, I think it just came out yesterday, the MSBA has published their dates for statement of interest submissions for this calendar year. And so in order to get in that pipeline, this first decision about, which grade level to focus at, and then the second decision, which specific school should be the priority and the focus of the statement of interest, are decisions that could be made over the next couple of weeks, here in January, with knowing that MSBA window opens late in January and will close late in April. So in order to give yourselves enough time to put that statement of interest together in this calendar year, those first two decisions would need to be made relatively quickly. And we've identified potential dates of the first school committee meeting tonight or the next one this month for the first question, and the two school committee meetings that we saw in February for the second question. Once the specific school has been identified and you submit that statement of interest, we actually have a little typo in there. It should be 426, not 226. But once that statement of interest goes in and you start that MSBA process, once you're in that, that's when these other decisions could be made. Things like what enrollments will be explored, what grade configurations will be explored, and what kind of construction strategies will be explored. Those list of things that will be explored will be defined collaboratively between you and the MSBA in what's called the eligibility period, right? And then the decisions around those three big questions, which enrollment and which grade configuration and which construction strategy, the one decision of each of those will be made during the feasibility study. And it's important to recognize, as we've documented in the master plan so far, it's those three responses that will shape the next step in your master plan, as we've demonstrated. If you pick, a 6 through 8, for example, that has consequences for where 5th grade goes at the elementary level. Or if you end up with one big 5 through 8 middle school building, that may open up McCarthy or Parker as a 5th elementary school upon completion of that project. So it's those three decisions that could be made, a couple years from now that could impact the next step of the master plan. So everything comes out of that MSBA process as the first completed project. And rather than try to do this for the entirety of a master plan, what we decided to suggest is once that first project is completed, you simply repeat this process and ask yourself the same questions for the second step in the master plan. What's the priority, which specific school, and then go through those grade configuration size and construction questions again. So in terms of decision-making right now, the two most important ones are the first two, right? What grade level to focus at and which specific school should be the focus of the statement of interest itself so that that work can start and be submitted by around April 29th of this year. So again, we'll pause there and I'll leave this slide up to see if there are any questions or discussions around that decision tree.
Anybody have any questions or thoughts or?
What does the ABCD stand for?
So good question. We are just looking for a generic representation of,
okay.
that you might have multiple buildings to choose from. If it's the elementary level, you got 4 of them to choose from. If it's a middle school, you got 2 of them to choose from. But you're gonna have to pick one.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
So is there any appetite for having a discussion tonight around at least the first question? What do we think the priority grade level should be? Or do you want to table that discussion and have a follow-up discussion later on this month? Yes.
So the priority age level doesn't necessarily have to be the same as the building we're gonna, so if we wanted to relieve overcrowding in the elementary, we could then choose one of the middle schools or would it have to
Yep.
be?
Good question. I think we understand what you're asking. In your list of priorities, alleviating overcrowding at the elementary schools was the #1 priority, right? And what we think we know based on our work so far is that there's 2 strategies to do that. One strategy is to build our fifth elementary school and then shift some of the population right into that 5th elementary school. The second strategy is to focus on the needs at the middle school grade level, knowing that if the outcome happens to be all of the 5th through 8th graders in a single facility, that you're gonna have something else left over to become that 5th elementary school. That's a second way to alleviate overcrowding after just one project. I think what we would recommend to you is that when you're writing the statement of interest, you include all of that information in that document. But for purpose of the statement of interest, to stay focused on the challenges that are at the specific facility that you're submitting as the priority.
If you remember, we had this discussion, I think, at one point, which is, and this is the lens, MSBA lens part I was speaking to, is, when you put your application in, your SOI in for your preferred project, right? That's the project that's going to be evaluated on a primary level. All of these other things, right, in terms of kind of ancillary benefits associated with that, right? They're not the key driver. And I think that was part of it, as we discussed, part of the problem that we had with the high school project, or collectively, the MSBA may have had with the high school project, because it's really hard for them to kind of see through all of those things and pick up all of those nuances. So, if you look at that first step, right, the easiest one to identify in terms of solving some of these goals or achieving some of these goals may very well be the elementary school project. But that has issues associated, as we've discussed, because one of your goals there is, how do we impact the most students, right? And give them, collectively on a district-wide basis, an educational benefit via, either a new or renovated facility. So part of this has to be balanced in terms of, yes, we have these kind of ancillary benefits that are going to be coming about, depending upon how the option is selected. But you still need to have that primary school project, which is going to be evaluated with those other 351 communities out there that I was speaking to, right? that's gonna be kind of the playing field that we're playing on here.
So if we would identify the elementary as the priority, we'd stand a better chance if we put in for a new elementary school?
I'm not saying that specifically,
No.
right? But what I'm saying is, the middle school, right, by virtue of the fact that it's secondary and it's touching all of your, kind of students at one point in time or another, right? There's kind of a political element, if you will, associated with that. The elementary schools, when we put through those red, green, yellow charts, very easy to understand the overcrowding situation. It's a little bit more challenging to understand how that whole overcrowding situation is remedied by going through the middle school project, but the middle school project in and of itself have issues depending upon which school is selected, how the grade configurations work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I think what we're trying to do in terms of laying this out to you is, when we're really looking to kind of do this incrementally and tip that first domino. So if you tip that first domino, right, and said it's high school, middle school, elementary school, then, right, there can be a heightened focus associated with what that specific, option is and how that works, anticipating your SOI coming down the road, as it relates to that second step, which is it A or B? Is it just A or is it A, B, C, D? Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, you've got facility issues and overcrowding issues at both the elementary level and the high school level.
Middle school.
I'm sorry, middle school level, thank you, middle school level. Your elementary schools, you're right, you haven't resolved the overcrowding issue, but you've made circumstances better in the last 5 years by putting the modular classrooms there. So if we think that the middle school level and the elementary school level are relatively close in both condition and overcrowding condition, and the thing that tips the scale is the likelihood of both MSBA support and Chelmsford community support, it might tip the balance towards the middle school level. And so those are the kinds of things we would invite you to think about and discuss as you're making this kind of first level decision.
And that's what I was going to say. I mean, obviously, we all know that the elementary schools are the area where we have the most concerns about overcrowding, but looking at our other priorities, we do want to make sure that we are impacting as many students as possible. That's going to happen more easily at the elementary level. We want to make sure we can get the support of the majority of citizens in town. And again, having a building that's going to affect the whole town versus one that's going to affect the neighborhood is going to more likely garner more support from the community. And when we look at the buildings, some of those middle school buildings are some of our older and less well-off ones. So when it comes to MSBA, when they go in and they look at some of those buildings versus looking at the high school, which they did in the past, I think that's going to increase our chances as well. So, in terms of we're going to have to obviously wait a little bit to alleviate those elementary levels, but we still have to wait for an elementary school too. So if we can get a middle school project done, then that's going to open it up just the way it would if we got an elementary school project done. So timeline-wise, I think it's, we're still accomplishing the same task, but with reaching those other, other priorities as well, so.
I think that Donna made a very good point, that if you do one school, the domino effect affects the entire community. So if you were to choose the middle school, your downward trajectory is that now you have room to alleviate some of the overcrowding at that elementary school because you chose a middle school. So now you have space for other elementary school kids to move into that second middle school or create some other way of relieving the pressure on that by choosing this other piece.
And one other thing, it's kind of almost an intangible, but this whole master plan process, right? It is a process. And when you go through that first project and it's successful, right? We're sure it'll be successful, whatever it ends up being, right? That success breeds more success. And you're starting to create some momentum because you're starting to prove out that the planning process that you've all embarked on, there was a reason for it, right? It worked. And you're laying this out in a methodical way, and it's a long timeline, but there's a lot of ground to cover here. But that does start to create, a feeling of momentum, credibility, And all of those things do add up. You know, we see them in other communities that go through this process, and it's tangible.
I agree. I think it would be truly tangible. It's easy to envision, having a brand-new high school in the town and all the bells and whistles in that high school, and all of our students end up in that one building. So it's easy to see that. But I think it's definitely not the project that's gonna get through. Clearly, we have space in the high school. We have space for a lot of more students in the high school. So it's not gonna happen. I think that the middle schools, my thinking is we do one middle school. It's gonna have an impact on the elementary. It will bring space to the elementary level because that building will be available to use. We can make sure that it's available for an elementary school. And by the same token, it's gonna help with bringing up that middle school up a notch. It gives them, we're focusing on them. They're important to us as a community, and we want to prepare them well for the next level, which is ending up at the high school. And I think that by giving them that focus, it brings them to a new level. And it's great. It's great education-wise. It impacts all the students, and it helps us with our primary goal, which is to make sure that we have enough space where kids can go to elementary school.
So I have first a seemingly random question. Are our modulars, did we get any reimbursement from the MSBA? Okay, so they don't touch anything like that. The second question is, what is the total number of middle school students that we have in both schools?
I'm sorry, what?
Total number of middle school students?
About
1,600.
Because one of the things that I'm wondering is if we should think about replacing one middle school or building one middle school, like one big middle school.
Yeah, and I think that's the downriver, right? So if we decide on the middle school project, then we decide which of the two middle schools we'd want to replace or renovate, and then we would have to.
So that is one of the decisions that will come out through the process. Once you're invited into the eligibility process, you'll begin to explore
Okay.
the enrollment. So you can ask to explore a 5 through 8, a 6 through 8, a 5, 6, a 7, 8, or even a 4 through 8. And you can have those discussions with the MSBA. So that is that third column within the dotted segment there.
And in many instances, right, and again, it depends on, the individual community and, what's going on with MSBA perhaps at the time, but they may invite you to pursue, two different investigative paths at the same time, right, as part of your feasibility schematic design process. We're working with multiple communities right now where they've said, should it be a high school or middle high school, or, should it be this enrollment projection, or should it be, that enrollment projection based on the grade configuration? So, once you get into the process, I think then that will start to kind of avail itself a little bit more as you're starting to be able to work through that with MSBA as your
Okay.
partner.
I got you now. All right, thank you.
And the important thing to remember with all of that is when you have those discussions with the MSBA, to make sure that the list is sufficiently diverse so that one of the outcomes could be a big middle school with all 5th through 8th graders in it, right? And not strictly focused, for example, on the 5 through 8 at just Parker or at just McCarthy.
Right.
That there's enough choices there.
Okay, great.
That's, I was just gonna say, I think, even myself, we've been doing this a lot, obviously. When we were looking at that presentation from the last meeting, it was very comprehensive and thorough and had a lot of different options on there. And as we were talking today, we don't actually have to get that deep into the options. That's actually the process that we'll go through with the SBA if we get invited into an eligibility or a feasibility study. after the statement of interest is submitted. So we talked about a potential mega middle school, one school. We talked about, would one new school, but being, trying to get an extra grade level out of the elementaries. So do you build a 6, 7, 8? Or do you do what was the other one, a 4, 5, 6? There were all different options to
Right.
basically alleviate that, but we don't even have to get into that at this point. This is more just saying, you know what, we want to approach this through the middle school model, and that's how we're going to have the best chance of, say, community support for the project, as well as eventually, once that comes online, helping out with the overcrowding of the elementary schools. And then, we think it's McCarthy or it's Parker that gives us the better option as far as being able to produce our case with the SBA. So those are kind of the two decisions we have to make. But, those other discussions we started to have are still good to have, but we don't have to actually get into that level until we got to the feasibility.
I'm so excited, I got a little ahead of myself.
I know, it's very exciting.
So where do we stand as a committee? Do we agree that, or disagree, the middle school project would seem to be the most beneficial for all the different reasons? Does anybody feel that we should pursue an elementary instead, or go back to the high school? Or
No.
No, I think the middle school gives
okay,
the entire district the best
yeah.
options.
So I would agree, Anna Maria,
Yeah,
Jeff.
everybody
So
said
I
it,
think
yeah.
so. Step one, right, first question mark. I think that would be our priority. It would be the middle school. In terms of which middle school, I know we've talked about the pluses and minuses of Parker versus McCarthy. I don't know if you want to talk about the.
Yeah, I think the data that we've presented in the past would suggest that both facilities have some level of overcrowding, but the overcrowding at Parker, when we're not counting the modulars, right, just the permanent structure there, the overcrowding conditions are worse at Parker than they are at McCarthy. When we look at facility condition, things like accessibility, insulation, condition of roof, windows, door, right, all of those architectural elements, the two schools are really similar, but even in that analysis, the Parker building is in slightly worse condition than the McCarthy building, despite the fact that it's a newer building than the McCarthy building. So, I mean, Michelle did all of these, so she should weigh in, but I think our current disposition is that Parker is in slightly needier condition and therefore may be more favorable to the MSBA than the McCarthy facility.
Absolutely correct. And then the final part of that is the educational program, and the way that the Parker School is set up is very difficult educationally for students. And, it's hard to be able to change some of those configurations within that Parker school building. It's just not set up to be easily modified for current day educational use. So with all of those pieces, if you look at both of those buildings together, we lean towards the Parker building as being the preferred priority solution project for your community.
And if there's specific data that you would like us to bring back and share with you to, provide evidence to that, position, we've already done that analysis. So putting that, a few bullets together about that, we'd be happy to do that.
All of that's represented in more or less, actually, in the last report that we gave to you. Right? And I think, when you go and you look at, and there's no guarantees, and I feel like I'm almost like overstating that, because I think we need to talk about that. But, I think there's 9 criteria, if I remember correctly, in the SOI. And, in our kind of history of looking at the 2 that always seem to get the most attention, for the obvious reasons, is there a structural issue with the building? Right? That doesn't hit you guys here, right? So that's good news. And then the next one would be, is there overcrowding that you're experiencing at the building? And then, so when you're measuring yourself within these other communities across the state, there's a lot of communities that are going to hit that one too. So that one is why it's kind of really important. And as we were saying, when we look at the middle schools and what's more readily understandable, I think the scale tilts a little bit more towards Parker.
Yeah, you have to consider too that the modular classrooms, and we have many more of them at Parker, don't count in the MSBA calculations. And the modular classrooms at Parker, again, are in not fantastic condition. So they're going to have to be addressed over the next, I know McCarthy's aren't in too much better shape, or they're in as rough a shape. There's only 3 at McCarthy. I want to say there's 8 at Parker, 8 or 9. But, you know, it's a significant number more. It's almost a whole addition to that building. So that is significant.
And I think maybe too, from a community support type of thing, we have done some enhancements at McCarthy. We are currently doing the auditorium right now. And so people are gonna look at that and say, well, you know, you're gonna get rid of McCarthy, you just put an auditorium in versus Parker. I don't know, we've done a lot of upgrades there over the last few years. I know McCarthy, there's the lecture halls and the
Yeah,
auditorium.
we did, the kitchen came up very
Yeah,
nicely.
the kitchen, yeah,
at,
yeah, that's
Parker.
true.
I think from a facility standpoint, McCarthy, the auditorium really looks beautiful. That came out really nice. We're redoing the lecture hall. That kitchen is gonna be done this summer. You know,
Library.
from a gym standpoint, yeah, brand new library.
Yeah.
From a gym standpoint, it's a bigger facility, so it certainly has its perks as a facility.
Another thing that I think about is that when you're looking at the feeder schools into these 2 middle schools, you're looking at Harrington, primarily those students go to Parker, and very few go to McCarthy, and even that, every year, somebody doesn't, you know, they want to keep their children together in whatever middle school they're going to go to. In terms of development in the town and areas where growth can happen in terms of housing, and then having more students come into our elementary schools and eventually into the middle school, that greater number would be going to Harrington, which then would go to Parker and would even create a greater amount of overcrowding. So thinking long-term, again, that makes more sense. If we want to keep the same type of thought about, you know, keeping the kids together who are moving up from the elementary level, it's going to be less and less that we're going to be able to do that if we don't focus on changing the situation at Parker. So,
Well, that and even doing it as like a potential grade reconfiguration for the town. So that when you had a new building, you might reconfigure your grades so that now the whole, whatever the configuration is, goes through those 2 schools, but they go through together instead of half and half,
yeah.
you know?
I think your point about the renovations is good, although, you know, I think it's safe to say we're not just gonna chuck the stuff out, right? You know, if we can use it, we're gonna use it, so, in a new building, whatever building that is gonna be. But I do think that as we've taken a look at the previous reports, even the one from 5 years ago, and we take a look at the overall plan for what it is that, you know, we're envisioning have happen, I think it's a very solid case that we can present to the town for why it is that this needs to happen. And I think at the middle school level too, as we said, I think it does benefit students, you know, who are going to move on to the high school and students at the elementary school level as well. I think it's a very well thought out plan. And I don't think that there's a, you know, there's a lot of room for argument in terms of, you know, the thoughtfulness that has been put into this. You know, the question is going to be, you know,
Right.
the financing, right? I mean, which we already know. So, but I think that we've, with your help, of course, have done as good a job as we can do in terms of, you know, really taking a look at this.
So getting back to which school, which building,
Parker.
Parker? Parker? I mean, do we need more, I mean, I think that's a general consensus.
In the report.
Yeah, I agree. No, I just don't want to, you know,
But I do
get
think
ahead.
when that time comes that, you know, if the SOI is accepted and we need to have you maybe come back and do a community input session with us, that we should, you know, maybe at that point distill it down a little bit more so that people can understand what the process was behind the decision.
Happy to do that.
Right, so, go ahead,
I
Jeff.
was just gonna say, not that I mean, I love finality to this, too, and I think that's the direction we should go in. I'm just wondering for tonight's purposes, and I haven't talked to you guys, but for tonight's purposes, if we kind of know we're going the middle school route, if we were to wait till the next school committee meeting, I'm just thinking if John could be here, and we actually then had, say, just a document that kind of lays out the two of them, and it's kind of clear that Parker is the way, just 4 or 5 years down the line, if we're trying to figure out, why did we actually make this decision? Could we then present that at the next meeting, which is only 2 weeks away? And then if consensus is to do the Parker at that point, kind of formally vote that night, and then that doesn't really slow us up from the work that we're doing.
Okay.
I just throw that out as a friendly suggestion.
Yeah, I think what we would do logistically is we would prepare our draft report.
Right.
As if this were the recommendation, knowing that it hadn't happened yet. And then when it does officially happen, we would update that draft before we publish it as final.
Or if it doesn't officially happen, we'll switch gears.
And again, I can see it going that way. I just wonder if, for historical purposes, just to have that
Yeah.
the review and documentation.
Ultimately, you folks need to be comfortable about this, right? And it's, the whole group, and it's, we're here working for you guys. So if that works for your schedule, it certainly works for our schedule. We've got plenty to do. We have another building that we need to canvass, so you want to be comfortable in your decision.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, everybody good? Yeah. Okay, let's do that. All right.
So you want us to come back at the 18th meeting with sort of a one-page comparison of McCarthy and Parker needs so that we can help make the argument for Parker being the focus of the statement of interest?
I think that'd be helpful, to just kind of have it on a side-by-side, but just to show us what's going to make the most, our likelihood of getting to the SBA based on this argument that we'll ultimately make in the SOI, I think would be beneficial.
Okay, happy to do that.
Sounds good?
All right, great.
No, I think it's really beneficial, but we already did it in all their other reports.
Well, I know that, but I'm just saying to have one, like,
Yeah,
cumulative
no, I agree,
document.
I agree.
Well,
Always good
what
to
we'll
have a
do is
little
we'll
help,
show you the other reports and then the work that you've done and the work that we've done since then.
Ways in the minutes and all that, too.
All right, yeah, fair enough.
Sounds good.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Good evening.
Can we keep this?
Yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah,
yep. I can email you a copy, too.
Pardon me?
I'll email you a copy as well.
Thank you.
It's not as nice as mine, but,
What's that?
so it won't be nice as mine, but.
I know, yours is better. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night, thank you for coming.
Right, next up is,
Next, we have
DEI work
Assistant
update.
Superintendent
Yep.
Hirsch is going to give us just a little update on some of the DEI work. We talked about this a meeting or two back, so just kind of have like one document that kind of reviews what we've done to date and what our plans kind of going forward are. So I'll turn it over to Linda.
And so you have like a little one-page report about some of the things that we had already prepared for this school year. Obviously, diversity, equity, and inclusion was the number one priority that was identified not only by, obviously, our school committee and ourselves, but our teachers and when we surveyed them about professional development. I think we have a lot of people that want to give many different ideas to help support DEI work, but we really felt like since no one was truly the expert in the area or felt like they were the expert in the area, that we'd reach out to, obviously, a consulting group that does this. So we reached out to IDEAS, which is the Initiatives for Developing Equity and Achievement. So this group has been together for over 30 years. It was a small group of superintendents in the Boston area when the METCO program started, getting together to talk about how to support students that were coming to their school district from Boston who chose to go there. And then it kind of branched out into a larger organization where they support school districts, they provide professional development, consulting, in a team approach of one instructor that is white and one instructor that is a person of color, so that they can give a lot of information and be able to bounce ideas off of each other. So for this school year, we got together this past summer to kind of talk about like what would this look like, although we identified the topic, what was this going to look like on the PD days? And in a small subcommittee, we were able to just kind of identify what would be best for our schools at the different levels throughout the school year. So we earmarked for all of our staff, for the majority of our staff, I should say, 3 PD days throughout the school year. We've had 2 of them up front now, and then one will be closer to the spring, where these teams have come. So like the high school has 4 teams, middle school has 2 teams, each 2 elementary schools and another set of elementary schools are working with different teams of instructors to help them through this process. As you know, the school committee has finished their last session last month. So the school committee had 3 sessions. And on top of this, the administrative council, so that's the principals, assistant principals, deans, coordinators, Jay, myself, central office, staff, are participating. It's a graduate level class, so it's through IDEAS. It's called IDEAS 1. You can get graduate level credit from Framingham State. And we're taking this course throughout the school year. So each month, our administrative team gets together to take a deeper dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we meet once a month for the 3 hours with we have 2 sets of courses running. We have a session A and a session B. So with our instructors, and we're working to get more information about how we can sustain this throughout the school district. So that's kind of where we're at, where we came from, where we're currently at this point, and we will obviously finish up the professional development with our teachers, as well as finishing up the coursework this May. I think it's April or May. I think I put it in here. So then that leaves us with what are some of the next steps. So as a group, we've been just kind of brainstorming, like what are some of those next steps? I mean, obviously, one of the things is we didn't have enough trainers to do the whole district, so we have to identify the groups that didn't receive the 3 PD days like everybody else for next year. So, for example, custodians, administrative assistants, we have to put some focus at the CHIPS level, right? So we gave them different PD this year because IDEAS only has so many trainers and instructors that they can share with us. I mean, we kind of joke around with them all the time, and they're like, we feel like we're on the payroll with Chelmsford. I'm like, you kind of are. So they were able to provide us with what they had for this year to do the majority of our staff. So then we have to identify who didn't receive some of this training for next year, and they will go through similar to what everybody else has done. The other thing that we have to do is the administration would then go off to the next course, which is it's a course specific for administrators. So even though we've taken IDEAS 1, this is a course that's specific for administrators. So our council group can work forward with that class, as well as identify a subgroup to take a little bit deeper dive into IDEAS 2, because the goal would be similar to what we were doing for MTSS, where we would have some people as a subgroup that would really be starting to become the experts in this area. And then we can branch that off at the school level as well, and then start subcommittees within the school committees, within the school. So we have the MTSS committees at each school. I don't know if it's the same, it's gonna be the same group, or it could be another facet of that group, because they do kind of fall under the same umbrella. But to be able to sustain what that PD looks like for each one of the schools, because this is not just a one and done year. We're gonna have to do this for multiple years. And then what we would have to do is identify those teachers that, have a passion for this. It's something they would like to go further in, and that would create those committees, and then they would start taking the coursework that many of us have already started with. And then we will work with IDEAS when we're done this spring with the course, to kind of decide what would be the natural next steps for Chelmsford as we're starting to evolve through this process. So they'll be very helpful in not only providing additional PD for us, but then helping us through that process to get to a point where we can kind of sustain it within our own district, within our own teams. And then additionally, for each year, in order to get keynote speakers, you have to almost start a year in advance because they get booked up. So this has been a keynote speaker that both Dr. Lang and I have seen, personally, very good. And I've been just trying to get a date because he's so popular. And of course, everybody has some of the same PD days that many other districts have. So we were able to contract with Dr. Adolph Brown to come in as a keynote speaker for opening day. I'm being very positive here that we will be able to gather again for opening day. And then again, to do a follow-up on our full PD day is another keynote. So that is not only in the works, but it's been solidified, and he will be able to come on those 2 days. And that's where we're at this point with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been working with Shannon Bischoff, so she will, help take a role in this as again, it falls under the same umbrella, SEL, our SEL coordinator. So she has a lot of ideas to go along with this. And our PD doesn't end here. Like, we have a lot of branch off pieces of PD. So for example, Stephanie Quinn's running a book club on Indigenous people. What does that look like in the classroom? She obviously runs the civics course for us as well. So there's multiple ways teachers can access other PD on these topics through book groups. And many people come forward with those book groups, and we support those book groups throughout the school year.
All right, any questions, comments, Donna?
First one is Dr. Brown, the same gentleman that was a keynote speaker at the MASC conference a couple of years ago?
She was at the
Who's at
MASS.
the MAS one, down on the
Okay.
Cape.
Yeah, down on the Cape. Remember, we were there,
Yeah, I
and
think-
and
I
there was
think
a
so.
Dr. Brown that was there.
Yeah.
And he spoke, and I believed he was from Chicago, and he was excellent, so I didn't know if it was the same.
We'll have to check, but no, he is excellent.
He was excellent, yeah. The other thing I'd like to say is, I thought that the training that we went through was great. I thought that our facilitators, Mr. Roderick and Ms. Karen, were phenomenal. So I thought it was very enlightening and very helpful.
And they did mention we were one of the first school committees to do that full training, so.
Right.
it was-
And then my next question is this, or my question is this. So as I'm thinking about the process of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and, you know, what we hope to achieve for the district. So we have like professional development, and then we have SEL. Like, this is my thinking. And then like we have curriculum, you know. Do we have some type of plan over the next couple of years of how to address each of these areas? I understand there's overlap, right? But they're also standalone in their own ways too. So is there a way that we're gonna be, you know, addressing each of these areas?
I mean, it's because they do overlap. I mean, it is kind of hard to separate them. I know we talk about these things in these silos and these columns, but that's why working with Shannon about, you know, the SEL stuff. So for example, we have obviously second step at the K through 8 level, Character Strong is new for the high school level. That addresses diversity, equity, and inclusion through some of those facilitated conversations that they have through that program, which then enhances what's happening in our regular curriculum. There's also overlap too with like the health department. So, you know, when students get into middle school, they start taking, you know, courses in health that, you know, address identity, talk about diversity, and then they just work with the teachers as well. So it's not like it can be this, you know, straight line of if you do this, this will happen next. I think a lot of it just overlaps into, if we're working on the SEL piece, the SEL piece would actually have the DEI as a component.
Right.
And then as you're going through the curriculum, you're addressing, like, remember when you learned this, or we talked about this, you're incorporating it into your lesson planning when you're talking to your students. Because a lot of these things, rather than it be like, okay, the health teacher will do this, the classroom teacher will do this, it's actually everybody doing it together. So if they're working on like a second step lesson, every teacher's involved. It's not just, that's happening over here, let us know how it goes. So when a classroom teacher's going over, say, a lesson in SEL that hits DEI, then they're actually teaching a lesson that could incorporate some type of reading or writing, they're gonna address it. Like I would say, we talked about this, you know, let's make the connection. Where did you see this? And then where do you see that in the literature if I'm teaching an English class? Or how does this affect us as humans if you're in a biology class? So I don't think it's straightforward, like here's a plan, if you step through this way, you're gonna come out looking like this. I think it has to be kind of organic and bubble up.
Do you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of different kids about this because, well, I don't know if you know, I'm very involved with the Civic Action Club within the high school, and this is definitely something that we've thought a lot about, just because I have a lot of friends who are people of color, and I don't want to speak for their experience, but I know a lot of times one thing they would wish specifically is that sometimes they would, because you're having these meetings, and this is amazing that you're talking about this, but not a lot of people watch the school committee meetings like as students, you know what I mean? And I think definitely when stuff's happening like this, and I know a lot of focus is on the teachers, which is really good, obviously, but I think students want to be able to be hearing that there's something being done, there's some sort of like plan going on how to address this, because unfortunately there's definitely still incidents of kids being racist or bigoted, and I hear about them quite a bit actually. And a lot of times, students who are victims of them don't necessarily know how to go about, like, even just reporting it. Like, I don't know if it's made too clear, like, that you can go talk to a dean or an administrator and, like, this is what will happen. So I think maybe just more outreach to the students about it might be a good thing.
I'm kind of hoping that a lot of this gets flushed through the strategic planning process that we're going to go through. Because, when we were talking earlier tonight, we are going to be talking about our theory of action and our overarching goals for the district. And I think when we take a look at like those different initiatives, it'll be interesting to see, is some of this DEI work like a call out, like a separate type initiative, or is it going to get interwoven into all the different things that we're doing? But I think actually the student groups or the focus groups around the strategic plan would be a great time for students to be involved and be part of that, because ultimately that will feed up to the strategic plan for the district that we adopt. And that really is going to kind of chart our course for the next number of years to make sure that whatever we, kind of put to paper as our priorities and our goals, that we're going to need to make sure that we do them. So I think that is a perfect opportunity.
I do think too, though, that, I think that's a great opportunity to do that, but, you're right, we're going through this training, and it is good for the students to know. But I think, obviously, we see it as school committee members, and teachers see it as teachers, but we do need to know if we're hitting the mark with the people who we're doing this for, which is the students. And, if we're not, I think we do need some mechanism for feedback, about whether or not it's working. And I don't know if you guys, maybe more regular conversations, I don't know, with Mr. Murray or, through some of the projects that you're working on, if there's things you can think of that we can do to either share information or to get feedback about things that are happening that we're unaware of, I think it would be very helpful.
I think it'd be really great, and this might be a conversation with Mr. Murray or like some of the deans or something, but especially at the high school level, to have a group of students who are from all different backgrounds, just in general, kind of to be able to talk about these issues and like just share these issues out for the most part, and then maybe some other sort of communication goes out to just the entire student body. Like, I think that would be a pretty good step that could pretty easily be taken. Like, I mean, it's not necessarily easy to put together a group, but that's like a good first step. And then I know a lot of different students will have different perspectives about like how maybe they could see stuff going forward that maybe you'd be able to take into consideration for sure.
In terms of administration, I know we don't have an equity officer, for example, or an inclusion officer. Do we have a committee that is diversity, inclusion, and so on at the administrative level? So who's, what I'm not getting a sense of is, let's say that at the high school, they have, Sarah's just voiced some ideas. Who can they just go to? There's a committee administratively that they can go to. Maybe middle schoolers have an idea. Maybe the elementary kids in their councils have ideas. Who do they go to administratively that will then take those ideas and work with them and incorporate them into the overall plan? I think that's missing, some kind of steering type of committee internally that can do that, so that there's an overall organization that is seeing this. One of the things I would love to know is, in this graduating class, for instance, the students who identify as students of color or have, a diverse gender, whatever their diversity is, what would they recommend to us to consider for next year? Is that something that we could incorporate or institutionalize into the system that would then help us for the coming years? I think we need something that, makes it official. Here we've got, this is the steering committee within the organization. It includes curriculum, it includes development for teachers, it includes all of these different facets. And this is where the ideas go. And they don't die there. They then perpetuate further.
I think the structure that was the most, to me, and you can jump in, but the closest structure, I think what we would have for something like that right now would be like our individual, either MTSS or SEL committees at the school levels. They don't have the DEI title, but they're doing a lot of that work that, Shannon talks about and those groups talk about. So it may be, there are already groups, there are already like stipended individuals to kind of run these groups and different activities. It may be rolling DEI into that and trying to figure out how best to do that. That very well could be a start, because each of our schools at least has those already in place, and they're doing a lot of the common work.
So I know you didn't want to get into this too much in this particular thing, but
Yeah.
going back to something that you had said, I think we also have to have some mechanism for students to be able to report things that are happening. That they can report to, talk to someone that they're comfortable talking to. Because if these things are still happening, then we're not hitting the mark, right, in terms of doing what it is that we're hoping to be doing throughout the district. So I think one of the first things that we have to do is we have to identify students who are being targeted because of race, gender, sexual orientation, or whatever, and then figure out how we're going to handle it, and support them.
I also just want to note too that, and we're at the beginning stages of this.
Right.
And this is going to take several years. Teachers may not be comfortable. They don't know what to do. And even adding into it could make it even worse, right? Like I've always said that. I'm like, what if I say this and this makes it, 10 times worse? I'm always like second guessing myself. So I think we have to, have a little bit of leeway to get people with, right now, we're just like, can we get some common language? What does this actually mean, right? And then how do we handle situations like this? So it is going to take some time, because I would caution against like, well, if they go and report it to this mechanism, or that group may not be the ones equipped to handle it appropriately, right? So it's going to take us a few years to get people up and running. I do believe that they have to have a way to report it, and of course, everything that we have right now is, your deans, your assistant principals, your principals, your counselors, right? Like, that's always your first line of defense for anything, or a teacher you feel comfortable with, right? I just want to make sure that our staff has had some type of, not just one and done training. It's going to take some time and some conversations and some brave conversations, because not everybody's always going to agree, right? And it's just, it's going to take at least another year to get to a point where people might even just feel comfortable at that point. So I would hesitate to be like, this is what they should do. Right now, I would say go with, your school leaders, your counselors, people that have some training in this. And then we can start working on other ways for students to get information or get support as needed.
The only thing is, if it's happening,
I was gonna say something.
say something right now. Find someone.
Not right now, but right now.
Yeah, it's not gonna, not a
No,
couple
well,
years to
sometimes we need
report
a
it, right?
direction.
But in other words, that whoever they feel comfortable, it can't go unaddressed, I guess is what I'm getting at. It may take us some time to get to the level as a district that we want to be, but no student should have something like this happen and it should be unaddressed.
That's one of the number one issues. I think a lot of people think somebody else is gonna take care of it. You have to say something. As upset as somebody may or may not be, but it's just, a lot of people don't have conversations, and then that's how things fester.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you for the input.
I don't have
Very much appreciated.
Thank you. Yep. Are we okay to go on to number 4? All right, so this is the Chelmsford Interface Report that I just provide every time we get about a 6-month report. So this is a group that works very closely with the town of Chelmsford. It's a referral and a resource group that the town of Chelmsford, the Board of Health, and the school department have partnered to fund over the last about 10 years or so at this point. And they provide really great data, and I think they're, good night, ladies.
Thanks.
I think their services are particularly important now, just with the pandemic and people having a very difficult time with outside counseling and availability of resources or whatnot. This is a great group and a resource, and what this report really tells me is that our families and our students are taking advantage of this resource, and it's a very good use of our funding. Not surprisingly, they give us a little detail of what some of the instances where students are reaching out for help. And it's anxiety and depression certainly are some of the top reasons that individuals are contacting this group. And again, I think it's just great data for us. I know we get the data, it's shared with school administrators, school counselors, and oftentimes you can even see through the referral notes. Our students and families are finding out about this service through our staff. So it's most commonly counselors, but it's certainly a teacher and administrator can refer people to this group as well. And they do a nice job of trying to pair up service providers in the area with students who are in need or family members who are in need of help. So I just like to provide the report to you to give you that data. And it is something that we track and we utilize so that you would have it.
Any questions on the report? Not surprisingly.
No,
the,
unfortunately.
Increase in the services.
Yep, it's certainly a good use, and it's a relatively small amount of money in our budgets, but I think it really goes a long way.
It just shows what's happening this year. It's overwhelming.
Oh, it's been steady for years, but it really, you've seen an uptick since
yeah.
we've been in the pandemic. Correct.
All right, well, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. And next one, actually, Peggy Gump, our coordinator for school nursing services, is here with us tonight as well. Do you want to maybe get Peggy? Yeah, she's out in the front. And we have the young ladies from the high school left. Maybe we could just invite her to sit at the table so we're not turning our back to her. What's that? No, I know it's awkward sometimes because you have to talk into the mic and whatnot. But we did have a couple of updates. And again, timing is always very difficult for us when this is ongoing over the course of the vacation week. But we've had some updates to our COVID protocols, or some that we're still kind of working through the motions with our Board of Health. What I did is just kind of highlight a couple of the big changes that we're hearing some questions from. And again, Peggy's here to join us as well tonight. So over the course of the Christmas vacation, the holiday vacation period that we were just experiencing, the CDC released some updated guidance with regard to COVID-positive individuals, quarantine periods, isolation periods, which were very different than what we had going into the vacation period. And then within a number of days, the Mass Department of Public Health, so if I refer to anything as DPH or Mass Department of Education, DESE, if you see this in the slideshow, updated their guidance to be more in line with the new CDC guidance. So for us, obviously coming back to school, what this creates is, I think, a lot of angst among staff and families and some students. Potentially conflict between what a school official, a town official, whether it's Board of Health or even like a private medical provider might give as far as recommendations for care. And we're trying now to all get on the same page around this. But there are a few things that we know have changed. So obviously our protocols had to change coming out of the vacation period that we just experienced. I think the first major one, and I tried to just highlight these in bold for you as we're reading through them. The first major change that you're going to see is if an individual tests positive for COVID, again, this is in a school setting, not in a school setting. If someone tests positive for COVID, whether you are vaccinated or you're unvaccinated, there is now a self-isolation period of a minimum of 5 days, where previously it was a minimum of 10 days. So the 10-day minimum has dropped down to 5 days. That is, at this point too, it used to be a PCR test was required, but now an antigen test that you may take on your own is also enough to have you start your isolation period. A couple of things what this meant for us as far as returning to school means that if you're identified as a COVID positive student or staff member, if you, once you're identified, it's that minimum of 5 days that you're going to be out, again, regardless of vaccination status, one way or the other. I like to stress minimum because there are some conditions for returning to work. One of them is that returning to work or the school setting. One is at the end of the 5 days that you have had to have been without a fever for at least 24 hours. And again, you can't be on Advil, Tylenol, or something like that to get the fever down. Your other symptoms that you may have had over those 5 days have to be improving. Even if you, on day 6, come back because your symptoms have subsided at that point in time, you still are required to mask for days 6 through 10. Now, in the school setting, that's not as big of an issue for us right now because we're masking anyway. but that masking is really important. So you do need to mask for those 6 to 10 days. One of the little caveats here as well is they're not requiring testing to come back to school on day 6. So as much as it may be recommended, testing, whether it's an antigen or PCR test, is not required. So this is the first major change that has come with regard to COVID-positive individuals, staff, or students. It's basically a reduction of a minimum of 10 days down to a minimum of 5. Peggy, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, only, to probably, explain that we do understand it has been a challenge to get a lab result. We do prefer if you do test positive, always consult with your healthcare provider, but if you could get a laboratory confirmed test, that is ideal, but we recognize that that is, obtaining a test is quite a challenge. So we do accept the home test. The caveat to that is the Board of Health and the Department of Public Health, when you do the home test, they lose the ability to track the positivity rates. They lose the ability to track the variants and to sequence them in a lab. So if a person could get a lab confirmed test, that is the preferred thing, but we will accept the home test. However, if you do a home test, you will not have that 90-day immunity that, we hear that if you are diagnosed, that, oftentimes what it means is that you're less likely to develop COVID within 90 days. So you sort of have that immunity period. However, if you do a home test, you would not have that 90-day immunity because it's not medically documented or confirmed. So I could see where a parent, might be upset or wondering, okay, my child just had the virus at Christmas and they're exposed in the classroom in January. Why wouldn't they have that 90-day immunity? But if they didn't have if it was a home test, they would not have that. So that's the only downside to the home test. But we do accept them and, we understand. But if you could at all get a laboratory confirmed test, that's the ideal, if you can.
That's kind of the gold standard we shoot for. But at this point in time too, like the home test, because some people just cannot get the PCR tests, for our purposes,
Yep.
We'll cover them. However, to Peggy's point, that then can't be used as documentation to prove a 90-day,
The 90-day immunity.
Immunity
And
period.
it could be if you have perhaps an elective procedure coming up that you were to go, to the hospital to have something, they would not go by a home test. They would need to know. And if you then test positive a month from them, they wouldn't recognize that you had tested positive a month ago. Or if you're traveling and you happen to test positive a month after the home test, there would be no record of that. So that's the only downside. But we do recognize, and it's even getting hard to get the home tests. No, that's the other issue. Those are quite, they're hard to get. Although I did hear from a reliable source that Walgreens gets orders on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that if you happen to be looking, that might be the day.
It's actually true.
Yes.
Yes, on Boston Road said Friday this week.
Friday, okay, so there's our tip for the day.
I do have a question. So with the 90-day immunity thing, what about the pool testing? Would that count?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
because, that's free, right? It's free, and then it gives you that 90 days too.
Yes, so if you were a member, if you tested positive in a pool, that is a PCR test, and it is a laboratory confirmed test.
Okay.
And the Binax now that we do in the schools for the test and stay, or for reflex testing for positive pool, that is a laboratory confirmed test, so that would absolutely count.
All right, great, thank you.
I have a question on this whole thing here. So it says, self-isolation 5 days after symptom onset or after a positive antigen or PCR test. So essentially what you're relying on is a child, for us here in the school, telling a parent or telling someone, I have a sore throat, or I have whatever, and that's symptom onset.
Yes, we work with the families when they call us. There are times where a parent or will send a child home because they're not feeling well, or a parent will call and say, gee, they have this symptom or that symptom, what should we do? And we'll typically say, talk to your healthcare provider, but if there's, a symptom of, a headache and a fever, would say, please get a COVID test, and that would be considered day 0. That guidance hasn't changed. It's always been the date of the onset of the symptoms, if there were any. Sometimes there are no symptoms, it's they're a close contact, or family wants to test for a holiday or to see a grandparent, and if they have no symptoms, but they went to actually the day of the test was taken, that would be considered day 0. And they would isolate for the 5. And then they could return on day 6, but you do need to have been without the fever, without using ibuprofen or Advil or Tylenol, and your symptoms improved if you had any, and then again, the mask for the additional day 6 through 10.
Okay.
Yep, good.
So that was for positive individuals. And then I did want to touch base on a couple of different things. These are changes again. So this next group is for asymptomatic individuals who are identified as close contacts. So we had the positive individuals, but now we have someone who just was a close contact of a positive case. And as a district, we have a test and stay program. And obviously, part of that was to try to encourage and allow students who were a close contact of someone within the school setting to be able to participate in test and stay, so that they would come into school in the morning, they would receive a Binex Now quick rapid test from the school nurse or school staff, and then as long as they're negative, they would be able to stay and remain in school. So there's a couple of things that keep coming up just consistently with parents we talk to on the phone, so we just wanted to really make sure we were highlighting this, is you can only participate in the test and stay program, again, if you're asymptomatic, if you're feeling okay, if you don't have any symptoms. And the exposure had to be from a school exposure. So an individual within your classroom tested positive, and you were identified as a close contact because you were within 6 feet of that individual for more than 15 minutes in the 24-hour period. That's a school setting contact. You potentially then may be able to avail yourself to the test and stay program. However, if you were on an outside of school basketball team and you were at a game or whatnot, and someone on the team tests positive and you're identified as a close contact of that team member, you are not able to participate in test and stay. And the logic behind that is within the school setting, we have more controls, we have more mitigation factors. We know that students are masked, where when they're outside and out of school activities, we have no control over that. Students may be driving to and from with masks on, without masks on. They might be in a sporting event and they might not have a mask on. Again, it's more of a control issue, and that is something that parents oftentimes, and I understand, are upset by, but you can only participate in test and stay if it is an actual school event, and you're identified as a close contact of that positive individual. Again, we talked about you just come to school during the morning. The first thing you do is you test. If you're negative, you're able to stay. The only change here wasn't as significant as the other one, but you previously had to test negative for 7 days in a row. So the one change with test and stay is you now only have to test negative for 5 days in a row. So you're not going to get a test on day 6 or 7, right? You're only going to get a test for 5 days. That was the big change there. It is absolutely critical. I know we've said this since the beginning of the school year. You have to provide consent as a parent for your child to participate in test and stay before it happens. So if you're identified as a close contact and you have not consented for test and stay, your child then has to quarantine. They have to leave the school and they're not allowed to stay. We're going to cover that in the next slide. That is why it's so critically important to sign up for test and stay if you even want that to be an option available to you. If at the time you're contacted to say your child is a close contact, you don't have to have them do test and stay, and you can still choose to have them quarantine. We're not going to test and stay without the consent and without the parents being involved. But to even have that as an option, you have to consent ahead of time. To Donna's point earlier too, we talked about pool testing, and pool testing has been great for us. The pool testing program is, 1 day a week at different schools because we have to do it different days because of the numbers. Any students or staff who want to participate, sign up, they consent. If you haven't done it yet, you can do that at any time, and then you'll be entered into the next week's pool. Every week, we update the data. And that is like getting a free PCR test. So as difficult as it is to get testing done outside of the school setting, it's a great opportunity for a free weekly test to see if you happen to have COVID or not and be able to act accordingly. Again, that's a simple consent. You just have to consent, and you can participate in that program. It is a great way to help out and help us control the spread. A couple of key things here that come up for parents, and we've received some questions on this, and this is one of the areas where DESE and DPH differ at this point, and we're still trying to resolve. If you are vaccinated, so the Test and Stay program is administered by DESE. It's their program. So as a district, we were able to apply to the state to basically run and offer the program, but we had to agree to the different terms and conditions and regulations that DESE sets. So our medical doctor had to sign off on the doctor's orders to be able to get and to administer the tests with our nurses. Our nurses administer them. We have to follow their procedures. DESE only allows you to test unvaccinated students. So if you are vaccinated, you cannot test in the Test and Stay program. It's not a Chelmsford rule. It's not a Drake or an Andover rule. It is across the board. This is a state rule from DESE that if you are vaccinated, you may not participate in the Test and Stay program. This is again where the discrepancy is coming up. DESE identifies you as a vaccinated individual if you have had 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna or 1 dose of Johnson & Johnson, and you're 2 weeks out from your last dose. So you're considered vaccinated. They don't consider and take into consideration the boosters, either whether they're available or whether you've had them at this point in time. So that is a question that we get from parents quite often. You know, I'd like my child to test. Maybe they, just up until recently, they were 12 to 15, and they weren't even eligible for a booster, but they had their 2 regular doses. They're considered vaccinated by DESE standards. DPH is saying at this point that they're unvaccinated if they're, say, outside that 6-month window from the second point. We don't have any, clarity on that, whether DESE is going to change that or not, but I just want to stress for you, that's not a Chelmsford decision. That's a decision that DESE has basically made that is one of their rules. And again, I know that causes some angst from parents, and I get it, because people would say now, even if I'm vaccinated and I'm identified as a close contact, what's the harm in basically giving a test to see? Because there are some breakthrough cases if that's the case. We just don't have the ability to do that. We haven't been authorized to do that. We don't have the permissions to do that from DESE. And each of our tests that we actually administered are logged into a computer system. DESE, it would be flagged if we were testing students who were not eligible to be tested, and it would put our ability to even have Test and Stay as an option in jeopardy if we ultimately couldn't get the tests because they said we were breaking protocol and we weren't following regulations, and we started to test this whole group of vaccinated individuals. So I do know that's a question we get from parents quite often. Locally, I know superintendents have spoken with DESE. We've been pushing to try to allow for that, so that if you are vaccinated under certain circumstances, you can participate in that program, almost as an extra screen for COVID. But that is not a local decision. I just want to be very clear about that, because I know that's causes angst among people.
Yeah, certain school committee members too.
Yes.
So it's true. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm very frustrated about this because I do know that you can be vaccinated and still get very sick from COVID. It just happened in my family, I mean.
And I believe the rationale when they developed the test and stay program, the rationale was to really capture those individuals who were most at risk, which were the unvaccinated. So I believe when they got the grant and they purchased all the testing kits, and there is a limited resource, so they looked at the resources that they had and the students that they felt were most at risk, which were the unvaccinated. And we wanted to keep those children in school versus saying you need to now go home. So it was a way to keep the unvaccinated children in school who are identified as a close contact. Now we're recognizing that there's a shift, that this Omicron is very contagious, and we are seeing breakthrough cases when everybody's doing all the right things and wearing their mask. So that's where, as Jay has said, we are, lobbying with DESE. We're asking, I was on a call with Department of Public Health today, DESE and all the stakeholders to recognize that there are, there is a change in the uptick of cases. We are seeing a positivity across our district, which you'll see on the dashboard, so they'll be faint when they see it. But those numbers are reflective in the community of Chelmsford, Massachusetts, and across the nation. So we are in an uptick, and so I understand why parents understandably are wondering, why is Chelmsford Public Schools not recognizing that? And it's not that we don't recognize it, we're bound by the protocol of this program.
I called our state reps today, just out of frustration. And I spoke with Tommy Golden and Tammy Govea, and I'm waiting to hear back from Jim Arciero and Vanna Howard. And, they shared our frustration, but, are at a loss as to what to do because I don't want to say it was unanticipated, but it was unanticipated to a certain extent. I think that the level of contagiousness of Omicron and the lack of availability of the kits, so.
Yeah, I think even for again, a frustration point is it is very difficult to get even the private kits for yourself, and it gets costly, to even keep paying for them. I do totally get it. It's just, this is something that we're discussing with DESE. We're trying to get them to better align with DPH because this is putting us in a situation where they're technically, in a DESE terms, a student, would be vaccinated. So they wouldn't have to test and stay. They can technically stay in school, but parents would just feel more comfortable. And I totally get that if they were able to take a test and make sure that they, weren't spreading or weren't bringing something home. I'm hoping for some movement on that, particularly based on the latest data and the growing case counts. But I just wanted to be clear that this really isn't a local decision that we can make. And we're bound, if we're going to participate in this program, to follow the regulations. We're just trying to apply some pressure and to ask for some reconsideration so that potentially could be an outcome in the future.
Have most of our younger students received both vaccines now?
We've had great success, and thank you for that question, because we've had several clinics, and our last clinic was December 17th. It was first dose clinic. And this coming Friday night, January 7th, for those students who received the first dose, their second dose. So I know there's a bit of a weather issue we're hearing on Friday, but, we're really hoping, even if we were school to be, if we're able to, we will have that building open and we will still offer that. And then I'm always making plans for future ones. I'm in talks with Remedium Pharmacy in North Chelmsford. Has been wonderful, and they've partnered with us. And we'll be offering a booster for students 12 and up, as well as the 16 to 18. So we're going to continue to offer the vaccine clinics. They've been great, and we did, we vaccinated probably over 600 students, and we're hoping to, do as many. And many families have been great, and they have gone on their own as well. So I would say, look for our announcements and our registration, but that if you have the ability to get it at your pediatrician or at a local pharmacy, to really take advantage of that, because it is in your best interest to really protect yourself, and it protects the whole school community.
So just to beat this horse a little bit more about the test and stay. If kids have only had one vaccine, so they haven't had their second, say they didn't.
They're not fully vaccinated.
So they should participate.
And they would be able to participate in test and stay, because you need 2 doses and you need to be 14 days past that second dose.
Okay.
And you get to see the dogs if you come to the clinic. We've had the therapy dogs, which are a favorite.
So right now, the fully vaccinated, per DESE's definition, have the 2 doses. Those folks, no matter what level they're at, but they have the 2 doses, are not close contacts.
Well, here's the thing in the wording. It's not that they're not close contacts. They would be considered close contacts. However, they are exempt from testing and
Right.
quarantine protocols. So we would ask them, and we let the parents know that there's been a positive in the class, and we ask them to monitor for symptoms. And if anytime they are symptomatic, they would, please get a test. But it's just that they're exempt from the testing and the quarantine protocols because they are vaccinated.
So for those, is it possible to get tests that are available to families for those? So in other words, the problem is you can't participate in test and stay because you're vaccinated per DESI's definition. And you're not allowed to participate, so you don't have access to that automatic test, which is very, very difficult to obtain. So are they going to make tests available to families so that then families will do that, 5-day thing and monitor for symptoms and so on? Right now, they don't have
I
to.
don't think so. I mean, I haven't heard anything on that front as far as the state making tests available. I mean, if they did, we would take them and we'd obviously distribute them to our families, but I haven't heard any discussion
Yeah.
about that.
Because so right now, it's on the honor system essentially.
Well, Jay, I mean, I know we're jumping all over the place here, and I'm so sorry.
No, sure.
Can we just finish this one real quick, because I lost something there for a second?
Oh, sure, yeah.
What was on the honor system?
So, okay, I get a notice that says that my child is a close contact,
Oh, okay.
but I don't have to do anything.
Well, you just monitor for symptoms,
All I have to do is monitor for symptoms.
right?
Right? Okay,
But even prior to this change, we
that's
didn't-
all I had to
Right,
do.
but we didn't have the ability to enforce
Right.
a test or anything like that, or provide a
But
test.
it could have been that at that point, I had more access to tests and I had better ability to monitor those symptoms because I could go down to the pharmacy and there was a test right there that I could buy.
I mean, it is getting a little more difficult to get the tests,
Absolutely.
but yes, but we weren't providing the test prior. I just want to be clear about that.
No, I understand that, but I just think with this particular Omicron or whatever's going on now, there are more breakthroughs.
And I will say, in past experience, we really hadn't seen much of home testing. That's really been something we've been seeing over the past month. I really haven't had a parent call and say, oh, my child tested positive with a home test, what should I do? It was always, my child has symptoms, and we would always advise them to seek, so the home testing, that's really come about as there's been so many cases, and then people saying, well, gee, I want to travel, things like that. So the home testing is really unique to the past month. I would say that's where we've really seen quite a number of people doing that.
I'm sorry, Donna.
With regards to what Maria was saying, are vaccinated individuals allowed to participate in pool testing?
Yes.
They
Yes.
are.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
so-
that could be.
That would be the way.
That
if
would
they
be
wanna
the
get-
way, right.
That's a PCR
That's
test.
what I was
Exactly.
getting at.
So what our protocol, again, back when it wasn't as contagious and this variant, is extremely contagious, what we were saying is we were, again, targeting those most at risk to contract COVID and to spread it with the unvaccinated. So we had always prefaced it with, we really strongly encourage those who are unvaccinated to participate in pool testing. If you are vaccinated, it's not recommended. However, you've always had the right to participate in pool testing. We just weren't really pushing it because you were protected. But at this point, just over the past week, I would tell you that the rates of people, students and staff signing up for pool testing are really increasing. So you've always been able to, it was just, it was more geared towards the unvaccinated.
That is a PCR test, right?
Right, that's what Peggy
that's a
said,
It is,
yeah.
yes.
High-level significant test, and you get a
Right.
free one every week.
Right.
That would definitely be something to take advantage of.
Yep, and if you participate in pool testing, if you recall, you wouldn't get a notice that your child was negative. It's just that if the pool were positive, so if you hear nothing, it's like no news is good news.
Right.
And if the pool would become positive, then what we do, that's called reflex testing. We typically call or email first thing in the morning and say, there's a positive pool, and then we would we usually ask, you come in on the bus, but if you'd like, come to school right away and we'll test you. In the event where we've had, what happens is there's a positive pool, a student is missing where they're home sick, we've called them to say, listen, especially now, it's very hard to get a test. There is a positive pool, your child was in it, and drive up, we come out to the car, test them so that they'll have that test. So a lot of parents have been doing that.
Okay.
Peggy, I just want to say you're as clear and as calm as you were when we started this whole thing back in 2020. And thank you
Oh,
for being so
listen,
patient with
Yes.
us, and you have been phenomenal.
I've got a few gray hairs, but I do have to say, you know, the administration has been so supportive. The principals, assistant principals, and really a shout out to the nurses. the school nurses.
Absolutely.
They are in the trenches day after day. They get a lot of lovely phone calls. They do get some phone calls where people understandably are frustrated with the situation, they're frustrated that their child is a close contact. And sometimes the nurses are on the front lines and they're getting the brunt of that. So I would like people maybe to give them a little grace to understand that they're doing the very best, but that, you know, school committee, to Jay, to Linda, to the principals, deans, assistant principals, and the clerical staff, everybody is truly working together.
Special shout out to Amy Regan, too. Right before Christmas with the, that special
fun little
situation.
bug.
So, you know, so that on top of everything else, really, I mean,
Yeah,
took a lot of
Amy is,
patience and,
she's a phenomenal nurse.
Yep.
Really, honestly, every nurse we have, we're lucky to have them.
yeah,
They're
absolutely.
wonderful.
We are lucky.
Okay, I got another slide.
Almost like.
We're sorry.
That's okay. So what's this one? This is, all right, so this is your traditional protocol. So we have the asymptomatic close contacts, and you can participate in test and stay. Or this would also cover the people who are outside of school exposures, right? This is what the traditional protocol was. So these individuals, the one change here is, again, now that the either 8 to 10 day quarantine period, depending, it used to be previously, is now down to the 5 days. It's a minimum of 5 days. As long as you have no symptoms, you can return to school on day 6. Again, you have to remain asymptomatic. You have to monitor yourself the whole time through day 10. If you develop any symptoms, obviously you go into a different protocol. But this previously, under the old guidelines, used to be either an 8 to 10 day quarantine, which is also down now to a 5. And that is across the board with everyone, CDC, DPH, and DESE. There's agreement on this one. Peggy, did I miss anything on that one?
No, that's, this is a tricky one where people are trying to wrap their heads around it. So previously, there were, if you identified as a close contact, and you chose not to have your child tested, you just simply wanted to stay home for 10 days, you would stay home for 10 days and return on day 11. Or you would say, I'd like to test my child, I don't want them in test and stay. They can remain home for, it was that 7-day quarantine. If they remain symptom-free, they could test on day 5. If day 5 was negative, they could return on day 8. That was those two choices. So now we have, you can just stay home the 5 days and return on day 6. We would love to have a negative test, however, DESE, DPH, they're saying that you have the option, it's preferred, but you're not required to do it. And I don't see a scenario where parents would want to test on day 5 because then it'd be pending and you need to be home. So, but you're always welcome to test, and we want to keep our school community as safe as we can, but I'm not sure how many parents will test on day 5, given that it's not required.
Kind of off topic, how, do we have enough test kits for all the faculty over the course of the weekend that wanted to get a test kit?
Yeah, that was a little,
It was interesting.
interesting to say the least. So Wednesday, we got an email or a voice message, I forget which it was, just saying that the commission was going to have a call that afternoon with superintendents. And we had previously received a supply of new masks to distribute to staff, so that wasn't too bad. But on Wednesday, the call indicated that the state had been able to procure enough test kits to provide staff and buildings with a test kit to help them feel safe coming back to school. The state was supposed to pick them up on Thursday, and then we were going to go pick them up on Friday at a centralized site, and then we could distribute them over the weekend. So kind of put the wheels in motion for that. Again, it was, I think the effort was good. I think it was well-intended. I just think it was, the communication was tough, and for all practical purposes, the implementation was very difficult on the end of a vacation week logistically. Trying to be nice, Donna. So we then got an email on Wednesday evening saying that there was a delay in the test kits. They were going to have to get them from a different manufacturer. Don't come Thursday. You can come on Friday maybe and pick them up. Long story short, that ended up coming through on Friday. We were able to go pick up the test kits, but but the state only got about half as many kits as they had wanted. So originally, the test kits, they came 2 to a test. They were asking people to take 1 on the Sunday before they went back to school, and then hold 1 for a future date. Some districts were breaking up the kits. It honestly was very cumbersome to do that. So we sent a message out to our staff to just see who would actually want a kit. And we had about, I want to say about 310 staff come by the high school. That was actually very good on Sunday morning, and they could pick up a kit to test. And then anyone who couldn't come on Sunday morning, obviously the impetus was to try to test for Monday. So I sent a separate email out, and with the extra stock that we've had people coming in this week to pick up a test kit. And we just committed to our last kit this afternoon. The numbers were dwindling, but we had another, I want to say 325 or so staff members ask for a kit. And we're out at this point. We're committed for the week. Anyone who would register for a kit can come in between now and Friday on their scheduled date and pick it up. And I'm just waiting for the state to tell me if they're going to get more. So if they get more, I'll open up more to staff. It was only for staff, though. We did not receive kits for any students. I don't know in the long run if they would ever do that and make them available. I know everyone's having a hard time getting them. But again, I think the intention was good. I just think logistically it was a tough thing to try to implement over a school vacation week, communication-wise and timing-wise.
Did Brian go and pick those tests up for us?
No, one of our other staff members picked them up for
Well,
us.
thank you to them for doing that, because they had to go to Franklin.
Franklin was our closest site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they went to Franklin.
So thank you, and also thank you to you and Dr. Hirsch and Lauren Cochran for handing out the tests.
Peggy?
And Peggy, thank you for handing out
To
those
spend
tests
my
on.
Sunday morning
On
with
Sunday
Peggy.
morning,
Yeah.
yes.
A little bit of rain, but that was okay.
Yeah, it went about as good as could be expected. I think the staff were appreciative, as difficult as the messaging was to get them. Those who wanted them were able to get them. I have to say, out of the 309, 310-ish kits we had, I believe we only had 4 positives out of that. So that's actually a really small number. We obviously had some staff test positive over the vacation week, but 4 out of 300 is actually a lot lower than I was anticipating, just given the rise in transmissions. So again, we keep monitoring. Everyone is really trying their very best to make the best of a tough situation.
Any other questions?
I have other questions, but did you need to go through any more slides, or were those the big ones?
These are my big ones, excuse me, for the slides for these changes. And then I would hope, over the course of this next week or so, because again, this was all coming right around the end of the school year, that DESE and DPH will be able to work through some of the finer elements of this, and we'll obviously update and modify our protocols as we go. So I'm done with slides, but I'm happy to answer any other questions.
So another question that we have been getting a lot is about lunches, right? Because, I think they're trying to do a great job at the middle school and the elementary school around spacing. But it's so contagious. Kids have their masks off, they're eating. At the high school, I don't think that they have that ability to spread out as much. And so, I don't know if anybody has any advice. I know what we're up against in terms of, we just can't leave kids unsupervised in class. We don't have the staff to be able to watch them. So I don't know how to address that.
It's, again, it's a tough one. I think all of our schools have tried as much as they can to, with whatever available space they have, to allow for spacing within the CAFs. At the high school, I know they have both cafeterias. They even have like a grab and go, and they have some lunches up in the library so that kids can take a lunch and separate out a little bit. So they are trying the very best they can. In the fall, when it wasn't quite as cold, we had the ability to do a little bit more outside. We just don't have that given the cold conditions right now. I know the schools are trying as very best they can. One of the questions, we don't have extra staff. We barely have enough staff to keep our schools running as it is now. We don't have the ability to open up additional, classroom spaces or other spaces for kids to go and eat. We're going to keep the space as best as we possibly can for the limited amount of time that we can, and then obviously masks on and go back to schooling. It's just a logistical issue where I don't have a good answer for you on it.
But they are thoughtfully looking at lunches, and if there's ever, some of the schools are bigger than others, so that they are, if a student is participating in test and stay, we are keeping them 3 to 6 feet as best we can. And that's almost always, we're able to do that. Now, if we're seeing, such an increase that kids are coming back, they've tested positive, that gets harder to do, but they are working hard to recognize that we're going to keep these students as best we can 3 to 6 feet away at lunch. And it's also important to recognize that when the kids were positive in the previous guidelines, day 10, they came back in day 11 because day 11 was the period at that time they thought they were least likely to be infectious. So there were no further guidelines. So the same theory is applicable here, where they're saying that this virus, and especially all the ones that they've tested in the labs from, say, December 1st up until now, have been the Omicron variant. So it's very few Delta. It is this variant. And they've come to understand that this virus is very infectious in days 1, 2, and 3, which is why they shortened it to 5. So that what we're really hoping is that we really will see the kids will do their 5-day. And again, if you're not feeling well, we really recommend that you stay home. But if you're feeling well, you have no fever, really on day 6, you shouldn't be infectious. So you shouldn't really be running away from it thinking that they're infectious, because they are able to come back. It's just that some districts, Chelmsford's not one of them, may have that 80% vaccination rate, and they may be unmasked. I'm not sure what other districts, but I think a big part of that decision was that if you were to have a district that was unmasked, you would want them to be masked just to be sure, because we are going from, we went from 14 days to 10, now we're going down to 6, and we need to thoughtfully look to see, is this going to work well? But to understand that they are not considered infectious, but we're being extra careful. And Chelmsford is always masked, so that wasn't an issue. There are districts that did put the waiver in that to be unmasked if you were vaccinated, you were at 80%, but we kept with our masks. So I feel like, we'll do a good job with that. And, for the snack time, the same question, I've been getting that as well. But that's a little bit easier to manage, because you can really say, okay, let's have our snack friends. And, we're not going to linger over it. We're going to eat it within the 5 to 10 minutes. And so your mask is off for under that. But cafeteria is a little bit longer. But I feel like they're doing a good job, and they're really thoughtfully looking at it as best we can.
The other question, 2 more, was I know we have some upcoming field trips. They're going out of state. I know that we had voted and approved that, but that was back before we saw this large uptick. Are we advising parents? Do we need to relook at that in any way?
Yeah, I did see an email come about some questions around one of the February vacations trips. And at this point, honestly, my recommendation would be it needs to be an individual decision about a family and a student and how comfortable they are with travel. I don't think that we necessarily should cancel trips. I think that should be an individual decision that gets made by obviously there's a trip company involved, they're gonna come into play, but on a school-sponsored only trip, I think the family and the students are gonna have to talk about that and see, again, at their own risk level, are they willing to do this trip or not? Aside from us even, and again, one of the weighing factors, aside from us even doing that, is even if we were to cancel a trip, there are other families in town that are traveling on vacations during vacation weeks, and they may be in the same destinations as the students who would be on our trip. So I don't think we have the ability to, cancel travel and, be able to kind of lock that stuff down. I think it needs to be just a family decision and what's best for that particular family, and taking into consideration, whatever variables they may have with regard to their comfort level with trips and things like that.
Given that they are traveling out of state, and in some cases to states that, there's no mask mandate, and the infection levels are extremely high.
Right.
Are we mandating that kids be tested before they come back to school?
We can't mandate that. I absolutely understand why we would want to, but it would be the same, again, we're gonna have other kids traveling to that same state just with their families for vacations, and we can't mandate that they have a test to come back into school. I think we can highly recommend it. I think we can message that. I would love to see between now and February, even to Maria's point, like as much as they made test kits available to staff, if they would make them available to, families that may want to avail themselves of a test and take it before they came back. But even if that was the case, we don't have the ability to mandate it.
And then the last thing is, and I had a chance to talk to Mr. Murray today about this.
Can you ask me a question that I can say yes, and I can agree?
But, you know,
Agree with you on-
this
I
is,
understand.
you know, but it's very frustrating, I think, for all of us, okay? You know, I mean, I blew off so much steam earlier today, I don't think I have anything left. Because it's just so incredibly frustrating to try and navigate all the guidelines, enforce them, you know?
The timing of these guidelines, to your point, was
Horrible.
stressful and challenging for us all. I mean, we really were scrambling,
Right.
during a week where we were trying to maybe recharge the batteries. I think the battery got drained.
Yes.
It really did.
Right, because that started on Wednesday of last week.
And this place is a lot more, people have to make a lot more decisions now. It's not just straightforward, okay, you need to stay home, this is it, and you return on day number, whatever it is. Now it's, when did the child have the symptom? And count out 5 days and make that determination yourself, basically. It's not as straightforward
Yeah,
anymore.
and we have had cases where a parent might say, well, gee, they really had a cold about 8, maybe 9 days ago, but we didn't test them, but now they did test positive, so their symptom onset, I friendly call them the backdaters, and we just can't have that. Because if you really felt that that was truly symptomatic, you would have talk to your pediatrician, talk to us, and we would advise to get a test right away. Because what we're just afraid of is then to have a student come back and have them potentially be infectious. So in that situation, we're tending to go by the date of the positive test. Because if we went by the symptom onset of 2 weeks prior, you technically come back to school right away. So we're really trying to work with families to understand and to get them to understand that we're really trying to decrease we want kids in school. We want them to have a healthy, safe learning environment. And it really takes sort of a collective effort for all of us to work together.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because in talking to Mr. Murray today, I know that some parents had expressed frustration, again, that kids aren't always necessarily with the mask, compliant, keeping it up over their nose and things. I work in high school. I spend almost the entire day saying, can you pull up your mask? Can you pull up your mask? Dennis's kids have learned how to actually pull up their masks without using their hands.
You know, man, they come up the hall and just move the chin and the mask goes up. I don't know how they do it, yeah. Yeah, I don't know how they do it.
It's incredibly frustrating to be ignored, to be sworn at, and just have kids be non-compliant. And I know that the high school is really trying to address this issue. They're trying to figure out, how do you make kids be compliant? There are consequences, but, those aren't necessarily followed through on the part of the kids. If it's a detention, maybe they don't show up. So we really do need the support of the parents and the community. And, I was thinking about this earlier today, and I thought about just us sitting at this table, right? And I thought about the fact that just this group has elderly parents who are in high-risk categories, who have children who are in high-risk categories, who they themselves may be in a high-risk category because of an illness or age, okay? And that's just us. I was looking at Jeff here. But that's just us, right? That's just us at this table, okay? So now think about all the students and all the families and the numbers of people that are at risk because kids aren't compliant with their masks. Or, there's parents are getting a positive test at home, but still sending their kids to school because they're asymptomatic, even though they should be quarantining. And all the other things crazy things that we hear happen. And I can't emphasize this enough. The vast majority of people may be fine, but there are some people who are not going to be fine. And we don't have the right to choose who can be fine and who cannot be fine. And we need everybody's help. And I don't know what else to say about that, Peggy,
Yeah, I think we do have to, look out for the greater good, really to recognize, just like be kind to everybody. You don't know who is having a bad day. Be kind and recognize that somebody sitting next to you could have a parent that's undergoing chemotherapy. Right. They could have a sibling at home that only has one kidney. They could have an autoimmune. So we really have to recognize, and that's as a society, to recognize that. I think what we're seeing is a lot of COVID fatigue. And I feel like the kids are doing the best that they can. I don't think they're doing it to be defiant, or they're just tired of it. And they feel
Aren't we
like,
all?
and they feel invincible, they feel like, well, I haven't gotten it, or I got it, but I wasn't very sick. This is all, too much. But to sit back and really recognize that none of us want to have masks on. I don't, probably anybody here raise their hand, they want to
No.
wear a mask.
I'm over it.
Everybody's over it, but just recognize as a society, we want to help each other and work together. And we want to see this, get an end to this.
To an end.
Yeah, and it
Please.
won't happen if we continue, because I will say, that we're working very hard in the schools, but the minute the bell rings, but I understand kids want to get together and kids want to, ride their bikes together and go to movies and get-togethers, and I'm not saying that that's not important, because the socialization, as we all know, is super important to really to adults and kids, but just be thoughtful about it, but it is hard when you leave the building and then COVID doesn't exist, or you're not still being mindful about washing your hands, wearing a mask. So we've got to kind of put a collective effort into reminding that you're coming back into school the very next day when you've all.
Right, and don't listen to Fox, don't listen to CNN, read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or whatever. Talk to your colleagues who are working in hospitals and doctors, and they'll tell you how bad it is, and how tired and stressed out they are, and how overrun they are in hospitals with COVID cases. And, I think that whatever we can do to, eliminate that.
I know at the high school, they're making, Linda J. and I met with the principals today, and we, had another talk about, strategizing what we can do. So we are really working with the principals and the
Right,
deans and the assistant principals on what we can do to, and maybe that might be, maybe going to the art club and having some creative ideas, or maybe some PSAs or creative signs, put your mask on and, things like that to kind of get more buy-in, because it is, especially these new guidelines, people are nervous, and we want to make everybody feel comfortable and safe in school.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming in.
All right, well,
sharing
thank
all
you
that
for
information,
having
and
me.
Hopefully it doesn't change next week.
Well, that's the thing, right, like New England weather,
Probably going to.
the only constant, it was a change, but thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very
I
much.
Thank you.
appreciate it.
And thank your nurses for us, too.
Yes,
Oh, I
definitely.
will, they'll be delighted to hear that, thank you.
All right, anyone have any liaison reports? Probably not, vacation, okay. Any new items anybody has? Just wanted to remind everybody, we have a workshop next Tuesday, 5 o'clock here.
Correct.
So just double checking your calendar on that. Anybody have any new public comment that they received?
I can't open my email for some reason.
I didn't get any of
check
mine, so.
either.
I didn't get any.
I have none.
Okay. All right, so if that's it, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's me. I move to adjourn.
Second.
Again, all in favor?
Aye.
Right. Thank you very much.